Sir, before we proceed, could I ask for the defo and the Connétable de Saint-Laurent to be raised?
Yes, the defo is raised on the Connétable de Saint-Laurent. We continue with public business. The next item of public business is the Health and Care Jersey Advisory Board Partnership Board, E52, lodged by the Minister for Health and Social Services. The main respondent is the Chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. There is an amendment lodged by the same panel. Minister, do you accept that amendment?
No, sir.
No, you don't. Right, very well. Well, in which case, I will deal with the amendment separately, and I ask the Greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to agree, A, that the Non-Statutory Health and Community Services Advisory Board, established further to the Act of the States dated the 14th of June 2023, should continue to operate and provide improved governance and oversight for the services delivered by Health and Care Jersey, and B, that the Minister for Health and Social Services should establish a new non-statutory Health and Care Jersey Partnership Board, which will operate in accordance with the terms of reference set out in Part 2 of the report accompanying the proposition.
Minister.
Sir, before I deliver this short endorsement of the proposition to continue the existence of the Health Advisory Board, I'd like to remind members of two things. The first is that this Assembly decided it should determine whether the Advisory Board continues beyond its first 18 months of operation, hence Part A of this proposition. The second is that whilst I supported the principle of a board's establishment, I didn't vote for it when the original proposition came to the Assembly. Rightly or wrongly, whilst the timing of its introduction was an issue for me, I won't complicate matters by discussing the reasons at this point, sir. That said, standing here today, I have no hesitation in recommending to members that the board is retained. The recently published performance review clearly sets out that the board's approach to decision-making and reporting is driving improved control of the department's finances and operational performance. I won't labour the point by describing all the improvements, but put simply, we're in the fortunate position of having 5 highly experienced health professionals who are doing a great deal more for us than is expected under the terms of their contract, and whose checks and challenges are driving real improvement. So I'm happy to confirm that whilst the board never fails to hold the executive team to account in no uncertain terms, relations between them are extremely good, as is the relationship between both of those parties and our small ministerial group. And for a number of reasons, this is vitally important. Much has changed in health over the past 18 months, and this is in no small part due to the assistance that the Advisory Board has provided to us as a ministerial group in many matters, not least in assisting with the senior appointments which have done so much to change the culture of the department. So I note that the scrutiny panel have recommended the appointment of a permanent chair, but I'm afraid I disagree with them wholeheartedly, and with good reason. At present, and as just stated, relations between all 5 members are excellent. The team is extremely well led by the current acting chair, who shares some of the chair's responsibilities with the other 4. This is something that they wanted to do, and something that they want to continue, and they have my total support. The chairing of the board is not, however, the subject of the proposition, so to focus on the matter in hand, and in concluding my comments on Part A of the proposition, I recommend the continuation of the Advisory Board, sir. Moving to Part 2, the establishment of the Partnership Board. So, as this Assembly knows, Deputy Renouf intends to reference back this proposition based on his concerns around Part B. I will not address the reference back or his stated concerns at this juncture because I want to avoid needless repetition, but I will do so at the appropriate point in these proceedings, assuming Deputy Renouf acts as indicated. The adoption of the Partnership Board would mark a step change in the way in which we approach health and care in Jersey, and in order to explain why, I shall endeavour to provide a little background. I know I've mentioned this before, but when I and my fellow Assistant Ministers first took office, we found the atmosphere with the government departments responsible for our island's health and service care to be unwelcoming, with an unacceptable degree of animosity between some internal and external service providers. Backroom talk was still aimed at the direct employment of GPs, and absurd ideas like family nursing and home care services, with its 170 staff, being put out to tender in the UK. These things were already in train and being justified as part of proper process. So, sir, it's little wonder that animosity prevailed. Whilst many talented people, both inside and outside of government, were doing a lot of great work, systems of communication and decision-making processes were deeply fragmented. Whilst much has improved, as HCJ moves towards a culture of openness and equality in its relationship with individual providers, the system itself remains totally void of any appropriate partnership structure, the absence of which has a very adverse effect on patient care on a daily basis. So, sir, in response to this situation, over the past 12 months, we've designed and consulted widely upon a new but simple structure to bring all sectors of the healthcare provision together in a forum for discussion and decision-making. In simple terms, the new partnership board will consist of individuals representing three main components of the island's health and care system: the overarching government department, whose remit it is to support the entire health and care system, rather than just the government-provided services; representative from government's health and care providers, that's the hospital, mental health and adults social care; and the non-government section, which is GPs, care homes, home care, dentistry and pharmacy. It's important to mention that this collective body will, for the first time, give equal status to the various participants. And rather than adding yet another layer of bureaucracy, it'll do away with numerous unproductive existing meetings, ad hoc boards, etc., and replace them with one clear and well-structured framework for discussion and decision-making. It's also important to mention that almost everything that the Partnership Board is intended to do is being done already. The only difference is that it is all currently being done within an organisational maze that has evolved over the course of many years without a holistic plan or structured approach. No one across the whole health and care system really understands where to go when there's a need for a problem to be solved or a decision to be made, sir. And from a structural point of view, it really is a mess. In developing these proposals, we consulted widely with different health and care providers, and on virtually every occasion, the proposal received strong support. And I know this to be correct, sir, because I was present at the vast majority of the consultation meetings. Yet despite this, in a very late submission to the Assembly, the Health Scrutiny Panel appears to claim that the proposition is deeply flawed. Indeed, if they are to be believed, our team has just wasted the last 12 months, sir. In their report, the panel has made a number of insinuations, such as selecting evidence to support a premeditated agenda and suggestions that bias may be present in what has been included. It's also being suggested that the proposal undermines the very principle of inclusive and balanced partnership that the boards are meant to embody, that the exercise is primarily political in nature, driven by ministerial instinct, and that consultation and supporting evidence was assembled subsequently to justify the approach. Apparently, the proposal lacks rigorous or systemic analysis, it overlaps with existing structures, and the proposed board will become duplicative, slow to act, symbolic rather than substantive, and it will struggle to move beyond process and symbolism. There is more, sir, but I think I'll leave it there for the time being. In my view, sir, rather than just denigrating the current proposition, the scrutiny panel would have proved far more useful to the interests of good patient care had they taken the opportunity to assess the current muddle and compare it to what is now being proposed. Had they done so, I can guarantee the outcome would have been nothing like the one they've offered up. Before I draw to a close, sir, I think I should remind members that Deputy Brenoff, when speaking in support of the proposed advisory board in June 23, said the following: "The question I ask myself is a simple one. Does the proposal, i.e. the establishment of the advisory board, make it more or less likely that the health department and government is able to deliver better health care to our people?" Reflecting on Deputy Renoff's words, sir, I ask myself the same question. Does this proposal make it more or less likely that providers from across the Jersey's health and care sector are able to deliver better health care to our people? I know the answer to that question, as do the providers that have shown their full support for it, sir. So finally, what is the Assembly to do? For me, it comes down to a very simple choice. Either members choose to believe that, in basic language, the proposition is a load of rubbish, and they vote to reject it, leaving the many good people running every element of Jersey's health service to carry on in a badly evolved and inefficient model, or members take a more trusting and practical approach and allow our health and care providers to get on with the job of cooperating in a new collaborative framework to deliver more efficient, patient-focused services, sir. After all, that's precisely what this proposition is all about, putting the patient first. Thank you, sir.
Do you put forward the proposition? Is the proposition seconded?
Sir, could I make my well-advertised move to invoke Standing Order 83?
Well, you're first on my list to speak, so the answer is yes, absolutely. You are entitled under standing orders to do that.
Thank you, sir.
Could I just ask, presumably, untypically, one waits for a proposition to be made before asking if there's a seconder. But in this particular case, the notes to our standing orders suggest that the chair should ask if it's going to be seconded before there's a speech in connection with it. So is it likely to be seconded?
Yes, sir.
Yes, very well. In which case, yes, please do make your proposition for a reference back.
Thank you, sir. I do want to address this in a positive way. To counter the Minister's comments at the end there, I'm not suggesting the proposition is a load of rubbish, and I'm not opposed in principle to a board. That is why I'm proposing a reference back rather than arguing at this stage to reject it. As I've said, the reasons for the reference back I would like the Minister to provide, via changes to the terms of reference and through the report, a greater clarity regarding the remit of the Partnership Board, the resourcing of the Partnership Board, the selection and role of the partners, and the relationship of the Partnership Board to the Advisory Board. And I'll provide more information on those in a moment. But the important point, I think, is that they do need a bit of thought. They're not just points that I think can be answered in the debate. If I could just preface this with a thought about what this is attempting to achieve. I mean, the P52 Part B is about stakeholder management. It is one particular form of stakeholder management, nothing more. It's not an end in itself, I think. I think we can all agree that it's designed to be a form of stakeholder management. And the idea that we should improve stakeholder management is surely uncontroversial. And the board may indeed, a board of some kind may indeed be a way of achieving that. But to justify setting up the Partnership Board, we need to be satisfied that it will work as a form of stakeholder management and do so without creating dysfunctionality. And I think there are huge risks here of creating a new layer of bureaucracy with what at the moment is an ill-defined mandate, which could add to the noise around health policy and delivery, whilst also giving a significant voice to providers without necessarily providing a similarly powerful voice to users. I do think, as proposed, we do not have enough clarity about the issues that I have mentioned. And in a way, this is not surprising, because the Minister has himself made clear that the details of these proposals are indeed yet to be finalised. When we asked him about this in scrutiny, he said, "I do not think we can predetermine the complete direction of travel. I think we are going to have to run this for 12 months and see how it goes." The Minister, I think, is in effect saying the important thing is to get the ship in the water and set sail. We can make course corrections as we go along. I would say in response, you do not set sail in a leaky ship. This is a leaky ship. In fact, there are many holes in the Minister's case, so many holes that I contend it would be dangerous to set sail without some urgent repair work. But I do think there is no reason why the Minister cannot put the vessel right in fairly short order, which is what the reference back is designed to achieve. It's also not surprising that the groundwork hasn't been done properly. As the Minister has also said, he doesn't think there needs to be much in the way of detail because, and again I quote a comment he made to Scrutiny, it strikes me as basic common sense that if you have a formal structure for people that are working together anyway to come together and make collaborative decisions, you're going to get better outcomes than having things as they are at the moment. In other words, the Minister's approach is based on the idea that his proposals are basic common sense. But I would contend that better outcomes are not guaranteed, just because you've got good people in the room. All the Minister's proposition does is create a formal structure for consultation and advice. It does not remove the conflicts that are inherent in decisions around healthcare. They can only be resolved by creating clear operating rules. And I do think I want to make one point here briefly, but maybe come back to it when we talk later. But it is worth being very clear about one thing. The Ministers' Board is not the same as the international examples he cites in the proposition. None of the boards he cites, as far as I know, advise ministers on health policy. They are designed to plan and deliver content taking into account local and regional context. For example, the New Zealand one is involved, I believe, in working out how to make sure that the Maori are integrated into proper healthcare, not health policy. Which brings me to the first point on which this reference back is concerned, which is clarity around the remit of the board. Because if there is one single thing that can improve the chance of success for a board of this type, it is clear terms of reference. And it is a basic function of terms of reference that they should be limiting. But these terms of reference are not limiting, they are all-encompassing. They include everything to do with service delivery and everything to do with health policy. I think all that is ruled out is the board cannot direct the minister to do something he cannot do under statute, which is simply a restatement of a legal reality. And if you don't believe me, have a look at the responsibilities and tasks on page 18 of the Minister's report, and in particular point 4C in the terms of reference. It says that the board will make clear recommendations to the minister on matters including the services that are needed in Jersey now and into the future, how those services should be organised, priorities for change, workforce requirements, facilities and equipment requirements, medicine and medical device requirements, data, digital and technology requirements, legislative requirements and amendments. That is just one part of the terms of reference. There's a lot more that's included. There's also, of course, a full suite dealing with what you might call operational matters. What is best practice for terms of reference? That they set boundaries. As well as saying what is in scope, terms of reference should say what is not in scope. Terms of reference that cover everything are meaningless. You might as well not have them. But they are also dangerous in that they create multiple arenas for conflict and for overreach. So as I said in the email I sent to members, I have not attempted to rewrite those. I don't think Scrutiny should attempt to rewrite those terms of reference because it is for the minister to determine. But there are some examples of what could be done. The ability of the board to investigate policy could be restricted to something that is in the minister's gift. So not something that the board themselves decide which bits of policy they want to look in, but something that the minister decides. But at the moment, Part 8G of the terms of reference say that the board may investigate anything it considers relevant. Anything it considers relevant. I think a useful clarification about the remit of the board would be to delete that catch-all clause. What else could be done? The board could be limited to consider only items which engage more than one sector represented on the board. For example, at the moment, if, for example, there were changes proposed to pharmacies, without the board, the minister would, quite rightly, consult with the pharmacies. Now, though, that will go through the board. The board is the structure that has been set up for that, which opens up the possibility that the whole board might decide to look at that. They might want to take a view. This is adding complexity to a process that could be simpler, was the remit of the board properly thought through. So I think the scrutiny's report makes clear there is a huge risk that the board will attempt to cover too much, that it will spend a large amount of time trying to work out what it should look at, and that as a result it will lack focus. Therefore, the first ask, if you like, of this reference back is that the Minister should provide much greater clarity in the terms of reference about what is and what is not in scope for the board to consider. We come to the second point that I think needs clarification. Perhaps you think I'm wrong on this. Perhaps you think that the board should have these exceptionally wide terms of reference. That everything should be in scope, health policy and the delivery of health services, and anything that the board considers, the full works. Well, in that case, what about the resources that are available for this gigantic task? The board will be financed with £77,000 paid for out of underspends from the advisory board's budget. But that is to pay for attendance. That's wages, if you like. What is the budget line for research, for secretarial support, for data collection and evidence gathering, for producing relevant reports? All things with which the advisory board is well supplied. The answer is zero, a big fat zero. The panel at its recent hearing with the Minister asked the Minister about this, and the answer was that the board would have access to departmental policy officers, for example. This is the same policy department that was so overstretched that it was not able to complete promised work, for example, on the termination of pregnancy earlier in the year, that has spent most of the last year pushing back against scrutiny requests with the repeated refrain, "We don't have the resource." It is simply not realistic to expect significant support from department policy officers. And the need is going to be great, given the remit of the board is so staggeringly wide. So I think at the moment there's a huge mismatch between the ambition outlined by the Minister and the means to achieve it. And the panel needs proper resourcing if it is to function. Anyone reading the papers that go to the advisory board can see the level of information on which their advice to the Minister is based. Their reports are evidence-based and data-driven, and that gives their advice credibility and authority. As things stand, the partnership board, on the other hand, will simply have at its disposal the background knowledge of its participants. And I don't want to do that down. That is terrific. That is going to be really important, and I think particularly useful when it comes to deciding those knotty issues of service delivery and so on, and coordination of services and delivery of services. Brilliant. But when it comes to policy, I think the issue is different. It needs to be based on evidence, and on the basis of what has been put before us, the board will not have the resources meeting 4 times a year to decide those sorts of issues with no other backup other than what spare time is available from policy officers. So the second request, therefore, is that the Minister should provide more information on the resources that will be made available to the board and frankly, provide more resources and show where they will come from in order to pursue its functions. The selection and role of members. Again, I think there's some confusion here. Are the board members representative of the sector or not, of their sectors or not? Point 37 says quite clearly that they are not sector representatives and they are not required to facilitate cross-sector consensus. However, we've learnt, thanks to the Minister's letter, for which I'm grateful, email rather, that he does expect them to be elected. So they will be elected by their sector, but not expected to represent their sector. I don't think this is very clear. Now, we have had the question arises around the person specifications, which might answer this. The Minister has criticised the panel in this regard and said, why didn't we ask for them? Well, we were told at a public hearing in May that the person specifications would be embedded into the terms of reference. There was no need to ask for them. They were going to be embedded into the terms of reference. It was only when the terms of reference were published that it became clear that they were not. And of course, these person specifications have now been sent to us about 20 minutes before this debate began, which I think does not really give us much of a chance to examine them. But it does give me hope that if this reference back succeeds, the Minister will not have to spend too long actually fulfilling the requirements of the reference back, because some of the work is apparently underway. This question of defining roles and responsibilities is very important. One of the things the scrutiny report points out is the danger of provider capture, which occurs when governance structures are disproportionately influenced by service providers to the extent that decisions reflect the interests of those providers rather than the wider system, or the patients in this case. And that does make it sound sinister, and it makes it sound like I'm thinking that the providers are going to somehow be acting improperly, and that's absolutely not what provider capture means. Provider capture is actually something that can happen very unconsciously. I know ministers like to hear about my former career, members like to hear about my former career, but in my former career making television programs, we made science documentaries for the BBC, and a new slogan came around which said that we had to put audiences first, and frankly we found it a bit insulting. We thought we make science programs, well, obviously we put the audience first. But actually it turned out when we were making those programs that a upstart came along and started making science programs in competition with us. It was called Body Shock at the time. I was working on Horizon. And they blew us out of the water because they had a very clear understanding of what the audience wanted. It wasn't stuff that I particularly was interested in. They produced programs like The Boy Who Gave Birth to His Twin, Half-Ton Mum, and The Man with the 10-Stone Testicles. It turned out that we did not have a great understanding of what the audience wanted. We had a rather highfalutin understanding of what the audience wanted, and we did have to refocus our attention on thinking about what audiences wanted rather than what we thought, just because we liked making these programs this way, we were making. And I would contend that the question of provider capture fits into that category. Nobody seriously goes into a role like that thinking, I'm just going to stand up for my job, my people, and nobody else's. But we are all prone to those kind of biases. And I think it would be the thing that can guard against those is those unconscious biases is to establish clear rules around how conflicts can be dealt with. What will happen, for example, if there is a proposal to develop a new service inside HCJ, but which one or more of the partners are already involved in delivering? Will partners be asked to recuse themselves? Under what circumstances? And so on. I think we're flying blind at the moment. As I say, I haven't had a chance to look at the information that was sent earlier. Maybe that will answer some of those questions. Finally, there's the question of the conflict with the advisory board. The relationship with the advisory board is clearly going to be key, and it is clearly being thought about, because the minister tells us that the original thought was that the partnership board would be a sub-board, or subcommittee, if you like, of the advisory board. And that was rejected after representations from the partners, the potential partners, I understand, I think on the grounds that they didn't want to be subsidiary to the advisory board and worried that they might be seen as having some responsibility for HCJ services if they were in that role. But the fact is that we have now, or this proposition without the reference back would simply leave that relationship to the good offices of the member of the advisory board that will sit on the partnership board, leave it as a thing for good people to work out in the best way they can. There is a reason why we have good governance, and that is to put structures in place that help ensure good outcomes. And I think the overarching feel that we get from the minister's approach to this is that it is a matter of common sense and that it will be sorted out simply by having good people, the right people, in the room with the right motives. I don't think that is the case. I think we need those clear guidelines around how this thing will operate, and the Assembly needs those before it can vote on it, to be sure that those processes will work, because the risks are very clear, even if I'm not sure the Minister fully sees them, which is that we create a new bureaucratic layer. It has multiple sub-boards. In fact, he has made the point that most of the work will be done by sub-panels of the main board. It will have a powerful voice in the island. It will be sought out by the media for their opinion on things. It will be contacted by the public who will want them to address issues. They have an extraordinarily wide remit that would enable them to act on those requests or that pressure. And the potential for conflict, therefore, with a minister, with the advisory board, which may be heading in a different direction, may be considering the same things at the same time, but from a different angle. Those things are all potentials for conflict, which can be glossed over and just, we think it'll work out, but I prefer to put my faith in having clear terms of reference, clear job specifications, clear ways of dealing with conflict resolution, clear ways of managing relationships. And at the moment, they are dealt with in the generality in the proposition. So that is why I have proposed this reference back. And it is interesting that, as the Minister's report makes clear, the previous attempt to establish partnerships boards fell because of concerns about lack of clarity as to function, purpose, and workability. They have not been, we are back in the same place, still dealing with that same issue. I don't think that the proposition as it currently stands, the detail around it, is sufficient to give this Assembly confidence. I do want to state that I very much value the work of all those organisations and bodies involved in the health service, and I absolutely support the idea that they should be fully involved in designing and the health service and delivering services, delivering care for patients and so on, the decisions around that. But I think that without further clarification, the risks around this board are as considerable, and I don't see the huge issue with waiting. I will just address that point finally in my final comments, which is the Minister has made the point that we've had plenty of time. I don't think we have had plenty of time. These proposals were published on June the 24th. What followed was 2 months involving periods when inevitably there would be absence over the summer. The panel published its report, was forced to do a significant piece of work, just partly because the Minister has not provided a lot of the background to this, and so it is not surprising that the report took a while to produce. We had it finished roughly, I think at the beginning of last week. We chose not to publish it then because we wanted to hear the Minister's briefing and make sure that we could respond to any points raised in that. But I think that it is only just over 3 months since those proposals were published. The scrutiny report is a thorough piece of work. I don't think we should be criticised for that. But I do think, to return to the issue in hand with the partnership board, we need more clarity. Thank you, sir.
So you're proposing a reference back, just to make sure I've got that entirely right. You're seeking greater clarity on the role and remit of the partnership board. You want clarity relating to the resources available to the Partnership Board and the clarity in relation to the relationship with the Advisory Board with specificity. And selection of role of parts. Well, is the proposition for a reference back seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the reference back? If no member wishes to speak on the reference... Minister.
So, I know this isn't generating very much enthusiasm from anybody. Anyway, it'll come as no surprise to members that I'm not in favour of accepting this reference back. And it's unfortunate that many members may have not had time to read the comprehensive message that I sent them yesterday evening. And that's simply because I only had notice of the intention to call the reference back yesterday lunchtime. This state of affairs is exceptionally disappointing, given the time that's been invested in developing the proposition and the fact that scrutiny has had ample time to work with me over the summer to resolve the outstanding queries. Maybe the case that Deputy Renouf had the summer off, some of us didn't, sir, and we've been available all the way through. And this state of affairs is exceptionally, as ministers will...
I think a personal observation about a member's private time and private life is not appropriate in the Assembly.
Apologise. Sorry, sir. Yeah, as members will be aware, we briefed PPC on the 2nd of June about these proposals. This was followed by a PAC and Health and Social Services panel briefing on the 9th of June, ahead of lodging the proposition on the 24th. That's more than 3 months ago. After lodging, Deputy Renouf requested that I postpone the debate, originally scheduled for the 2nd of September, to today's sitting, which I was content to do as it allowed additional time to scrutinise the proposals if required. Now, sir, I stand to be corrected. To the best of my knowledge, the panel has not sought a single piece of advice or passed a single comment to me on these proposals over the course of that time. As such, it came as a great surprise to see the out-of-time amendment coming through, and an even greater surprise to see the Deputy's comments, which appear to be incorrect and based on inaccurate assumptions. Whilst I fully accept that any member has the right to propose a reference back, it seems very hard to justify if absolutely no effort has been made to deal with the misgivings over a long 3-month period, when for some members there wasn't a great deal going on. Even more difficult to justify when one considers that the principal questions cited as reasons to justify it were all answered comprehensively in the information supplied from the outset. As members will have read, the areas that apparently require more information are the following: the selection and role of the partners, the remit of the Partnership Board, the relationship of the Partnership Board to the Advisory Board, and the resources of the Partnership Board. Having answered these questions already and restated them in last night's email, I won't repeat them here, but it has to be said that if the Assembly to refer this back, I'd have very little else to say. As I see it, the real problem here, and I do say this very respectfully, sir, is that on the one hand, Deputy Renouf is struggling to understand the need for or the methodology required to create a proper, if relatively basic corporate structure, and on the other, is wrestling with the tendency to put excessive process before practical application. And I don't wish to be unkind, sir, but I can remind members that this comes from a deputy who was trying to put laws in place to make farmers apply for planning permission to cut an 8-centimetre branch in tending to their affairs. So the underlying truth is that our overall health system badly lacks a proper structure, and the sooner we get on and employ one that virtually all service providers understand and have endorsed, the better, and the more effective and more efficient the service will be. As I said in my introductory speech, sir, the simple question is this: do we want unnecessary detail and endless delay, or do we just want to get on with the job? I genuinely hope it will be the latter, sir. Thank you.
Well, Deputy Dublin.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to clarify, first of all, that the Minister mentioned that scrutiny had plenty of time to do their work on this, and just to remind members that this isn't a scrutiny reference back. And I completely understand Deputy Renouf's desire to ask for a reference back. He's explained his reasons for doing so very eloquently. And the panel not being completely agreed on it does not mean that his reasons aren't legitimate and should be listened to. I also wanted to and thank you, sir, for raising the points about not commenting on members' personal circumstances. And I just wanted to put on record the fact that Deputy Renner is a very hard-working scrutiny and extremely valued member of my panel. And he has worked hard alongside us to scrutinise this, and we have produced extended comments of 23 pages that go into detail into this proposition. I personally don't feel I can support a reference back at this time, and I say this reluctantly because I would ideally have liked to support my vice chair, but my reasons for not supporting a reference back at this time are that I do feel that we have done the necessary scrutiny work to be able to make a decision on this today. And we have lodged an amendment. And I think rather ironically, the Minister said it himself, he doesn't think that there's a lot more to come back to us. That's part of the problem, isn't it? That there perhaps isn't the depth of consideration behind these proposals to actually come back to us with any further information. That's a problem in itself. I also do hear what the Minister is saying about wanting to get on with things and to innovate. And my feeling is that were the panel's amendment to be passed, that would be satisfactory to me personally. So that's the course of action that I'm going to take today. But I very much respect Deputy Reneff's rationale behind wanting to ask for a reference back. It's completely his prerogative to do so, and he has explained himself very eloquently.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the reference back? Deputy Stevens.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow my panel chair there, and would just like to start by saying absolutely that I think the Minister opened with a complete misrepresentation of our scrutiny panel and the work that it has done, and would suggest that fundamentally it shows that the Minister just doesn't get what scrutiny is. So when I sat down to write the speech for this main proposition, I had a clear plan and approach in my head that I wanted to focus on a handful of specific areas of focus which concerned me, or I felt needed exploring further, so that I could focus on them, keep it simple, highlight them, and try to explain it in a really clear way. But when I started going back over the panel's comments, reread the proposition and the other bits of documentation, it was difficult to know where to start. The comments from the panel run to 23 pages for good reason. There's an awful lot to say. And when I started writing a list of my outstanding questions, which remain in my own head about this proposal, I have to admit I gave up after 10, because it became obvious that I was still nowhere near finished and it could have just gone on and on and on. And that's the point here. This proposal, as it's currently set out, almost raises more questions than it answers. And the Minister's response to many of those questions has been and continues to be either, don't worry, we've got it all in hand, it'll be okay, or don't worry, we'll work it out as we go along. But sir, I'm not convinced. I could be. That's not to say I won't support a partnership board, and in many ways I really do want to. I want to support a model which aims to put community engagement at its heart, but there's still some outstanding questions, a number of them, and some really important ones, and too few convincing answers. Clarity is the word that I keep coming back to. Where is the clarity? The Minister says he's been more than generous to the scrutiny process, but that enough is enough now, it's time to get on with it. We can't afford more delays, people have had enough, we just want action now. And I'm really sympathetic to those arguments, and they're really attractive, particularly in a place like Jersey, where we all know really well that change can be really painfully slow. And within a political system which, we have to say, we're not known for being very nimble, are we? It's tempting to think of it as a refreshing change. But we're also an island which, quite rightly, has very high standards. where public scrutiny is very, very intense, where mistakes aren't easily forgiven, where blame culture is rife, and as a result, risk appetites are typically low. Accountability, clarity, and transparency are therefore even more important, and due process plays a really important part in ensuring good governance, even from the very beginnings of a project. The gaps in this proposal that remain are not ones that could have been filled by more work by scrutiny. These are not scrutiny's questions to answer. They're for the Minister and his team to fill the gaps. And I have to say, not to fill them via email or even on the floor of this House, but in the proposition and the report itself. That's an important and transparent record of public interest, and one that stays there for many, many years for us to return to. So if I'm to give this proposal my vote in the Assembly, I want to be sure I'm making the right decision for our island, having considered as much information at my disposal as possible. I want to be able to tell my constituents that I thoroughly considered the matter on their behalf, not that I was forced into making a decision on half the information because we just need to get on with it. P170/2010, which is referred to in the Minister's proposition and is part of why this is being brought to the Assembly in this form, is very clear that the creation of bodies and boards which met certain criteria like this one have to come to the Assembly for approval to ensure appropriate checks and balances of democracy. The questions raised by Deputy Renouf are legitimate and important ones. I therefore ask members to allow those appropriate checks and balances to take place by supporting this reference back.
Much, Deputy. Is any of them, Deputy Scott?
Thank you, sir. I read the proposition and scrutiny's report with interest and could see a lot of work has been done on both sides. I think Deputy Stephenson's raised a fair question about when does the job of scrutiny ever end? Because the fact is that, as I said in a previous debate, the devil's often in the detail. At the same time, how much detail can be sorted out before an actual change takes place? Change that perhaps people want, change perhaps that the electorate wants. And when I was looking at this matter, I also looked at the Controller and Auditor General's report on the governance of health. I don't know if all States members know the date of that, but I can see some do. 2018. I was a lay member of the PAC at the time, and I doubt that many members have even had time to look back at this report. I suspect scrutiny have, because of course it is relevant to the governance arrangements of health. But I'm just going to remind people that this report mentioned it was in 2016 the Council of Ministers asked the Minister for Health and Social Services to review the strategic governance arrangements to ensure Jersey's the most effective health and social care system for the future. Following support from consultants, a proposal for a powerful system partnership board with public and patient representatives was developed, but subsequently withdrawn. Now, why was it withdrawn? And the reason it was withdrawn was because the States Assembly at the time said that it rejected on the basis that the ministers had failed to consult the Health and Social Services Scrutiny Panel, the Public Accounts Committee, and the Privileges and Procedures Committee before establishing a remunerated board. Anybody getting a sense of déjà vu here? This proposal started off in 2016. And here we are having, we still don't have enough detail. So I do expect the Minister for Health to provide that detail. And I do expect scrutiny to keep asking the questions. But I cannot support this reference back for the reasons that I do believe that we need to get on with it. I do believe that the partnership board is essential to improve our health service, which at the time of this report, and there was a States Assembly proposition that supported the report that had been created, and do you know what it said? It said our health system is not sustainable. The cost of it's not sustainable. And the actual Control and Auditor General's report said the health system was not fit for purpose. We cannot continue like this. So I will support the Health Minister in this, in getting on with it. Thank you, sir.
Much. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition on the reference back? No other member wishes to speak. Then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Bennett to respond.
Thank you, sir. Perhaps I made a mistake when I approached the speech on the reference back. I thought that the best approach would be to focus on the specifics of the proposition and the detail of the reference back. Perhaps I shouldn't spend more time on other matters. It is tempting to leave that path, but I will resist temptation, because this debate is actually the only chance this Assembly will have to discuss some of the details around this proposition. It has gone through with remarkably little comment so far. So I make no apologies for bringing that reference back. And I do want to resist, I do want to push back against this idea that because 10 years ago somebody suggested some form of stakeholder engagement vaguely similar to what is being proposed, that we should now adopt the specific proposals put forward by the Minister. The issues are different, and we cannot have a situation where weak proposals are pushed through, purely because in the past other people have also made weak proposals. That is not a recipe for good governance. But I have made very clear that I am not against the principle of a partnership board, and I'm certainly not against the principle of improving stakeholder engagement and involvement in the delivery and coordination of services. My intent with this reference back is to improve the proposition in order that it will actually deliver that and not deliver some of the dysfunctionality that could arise from the fact that the remit is so incredibly broad. The Minister did not address that in his speech. He said nothing about the extraordinarily wide remit of the board, the fact that it is a self-selecting remit. He has not addressed the conflicts that could arise as a result of that. He's not addressed the resourcing implications that arise from the board having such an extremely wide remit. These are all problems that I think we can assume from the comments I quoted in my speech, he thinks can be worked out down the line. That is not good governance. Good governance is to set in place structures which ensure that something has a reasonable chance of success. The Minister characterises my position as being one of an excessive desire to tie people up in knots or some equivalent. That is not my intent. My intent in approaching this is to ensure that the processes are in place that any normal board of this type would have. Any normal board. And the Minister says if this reference back passes, he doesn't know what he would add. Well, I bet his officers know what they would add, because the rules, and not the rules, the processes and procedures around these kind of boards are very well understood. And they do involve setting terms of reference, which are limiting, not terms of references that are so broad that they can encompass everything. They do involve matching resources to ambition, and they do involve clear definitions of the roles and responsibilities of the people involved to ensure that conflicts are managed, to ensure that relationships are dealt with within a framework, not depending on the goodwill of the people involved. despite all the ambitions of people to behave in a way that would be positive, the fact is that conflicts are inevitable. The Minister, I think, has accepted in one of our hearings that the board will become the focus of those conflicts, where those conflicts, does not get rid of those conflicts. Those conflicts still exist. They don't disappear because the board is created. They transfer into the board. And it is incumbent, I think, on the Minister to provide some detail about how those kind of conflicts around different service providers, different new services that might be provided, services that may be stopped in the future, that those sorts of things should be, if they are going to be dealt with by the board, that there are processes in place for understanding how the board will approach them, what limits will be placed on their work and so on. So I think it's a very reasonable reference back that is designed to help make the board work better, and it will give the Assembly a second chance to look at it and see what those refined proposals look like. The chair of the panel correctly pointed out that this is a personal reference bag. It's not a panel reference bag. I note that she identifies exactly the same issues with regard to the board around lack of clarity, around the problems that there simply isn't enough clarity around the roles and responsibilities and resourcing and so on. She simply takes the view that that can be dealt with in a different way, and we respectfully disagree on that. I think that there is very little to be lost from this reference back. The Minister will, of course, not want to delay, but it would be a matter of 3 to 6 weeks, 1 to 2 sessions, for a process which began just 3 months ago. It is a reasonable request, and if followed, I think it would lead to a better outcome in which the Assembly could have more confidence. So I move the reference back, sir. Call for the appel.
That is called for. Invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on a reference back for P52 to provide information specified by the proposer. Ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 11 votes pour, 35 votes contre, 1 abstention. Yes.
Those members voting pour, the Connétable, St Lawrence, St Clement and St Mary, and Deputies Gardner, Moore, Miles, Renouf, Jeune, Alex Curtis, Wilson and Stevenson. And those members voting contre, the Connétable, St Helier, St Brelard, Trinity, St Peter, St John, Grouville and St Saviour, and Deputies Southern, Labby, Tadier, Luce, Morel, Lehegra, Ayer, Rob Ward, Alves, Farnham, Mesick, Balash, Coles, Porray, War, Scott, Catherine Curtis, Beltham, Rose Binet, Howell, Tom Binet, Ferry, Kovac, Barbara Ward, Andrews, Miller, Dublé, and the Connétable St One, and the Connétable St Martin abstained.
Well, the main proposition has been proposed and seconded. There's an amendment to the proposition lodged by the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph B. After the words accompanying the proposition, insert the words, except that in paragraph 1, after the words, it is a non-statutory board, i.e. with no legal powers, there should be inserted the words, these terms of reference are valid for a maximum 18-month period. At the end of that period, the Minister, following a review of the board's activities, performance and membership, and with the agreement of the Assembly, must determine whether the board should A, continue to operate under these terms of reference or amended terms of reference, or B, be disbanded.
Deputy Dublé. Is Deputy Dublé online?
Yes, thank you, sir. And Thank you, and I hope members will forgive me for joining online. I've managed to hop on after my medical appointment. So I'll speak briefly, sir, to propose this amendment, and I know that my panel members will also want to speak. And I wish to propose the amendment which has been agreed by the panel, and it follows the 23-page comment paper that we presented. And we felt that this was a moderate amendment to make, which makes the initial appointment of the Health and Care Partnership Board limited initially to an 18-month pilot period. And this is sensible for several reasons, which many of which have been raised in the reference back debate. So the panel is not yet convinced that the establishment of the board has had sufficient and rigorous analysis. And previous speakers have mentioned the common sense approach. Sorry, sir, am I still being
Yes,
heard?
we can hear you now. You did go quiet for just a moment, but I think we're okay again.
I'll continue. Thank you, sir. So the 18-month time frame would provide a structured opportunity to assess the board's effectiveness and fitness for purpose, and identify and address any governance concerns that would arise, and avoid exposure to unforeseen costs or inefficiencies. And so I think, given the concerns that have been raised in our comments, this approach would allow time for this new board to bed in. It would mean that the minister isn't held up in the actions that he wishes to take, because I completely hear what he's saying about wanting to make change and to work slightly differently and to do that quickly. This isn't going to delay anything at all. What it does allow is for that check and the balance, and for actually the decision-making power on whether the board continues to rest with the future States Assembly, which the panel believes that's where it should rest, sir, and that's something that is as all-encompassing in scope as this board for an area that is as important as our health service. There should be a touch point whereby it returns to the States Assembly for confirmation. And indeed, sir, there is precedent for this. The advisory board itself was subject to an amendment from Deputy Feltham, which proposed exactly the same length pilot period of 18 months. And that at the time was welcomed by government, and it was something that was supported across the Assembly and was seen as sensible and giving that balance of allowing a minister to innovate and to make those new measures as proposed, but also having that touch point in 18 months. So I hope that the Assembly will see this as the evidence-based, balanced amendment that it is. It's based upon all of the evidence that we have scrutinised and put in our comments paper, and we see this as a very reasonable approach to take, and one that empowers the future States Assembly in this respect.
Thank you very much. Deputy, is the amendment seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. And I rise to speak in opposition to the amendment lodged by the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. While I acknowledge the panel's intent to introduce a cautious framework for oversight, I believe this amendment risks undermining the very progress we seek in reforming and strengthening governance within health and care Jersey. The proposition before us aims to establish a non-statutory health care partnership board, an entity designed to bring together diverse voices, foster collaboration, and provide strategic guidance to a sector that touches every life in our community. It is a proposition rooted in the recognition that our health and care services require not only operational excellence, but also thoughtful, inclusive governance. The amendment, however, introduces a sunset clause, a predetermined 18-month expiry before the board has even convened. It mandates a review and a decision to either continue, amend, or disband the board. On the surface, this may appear prudent, but in practice it sends a signal of hesitation, of conditional support and of institutional fragility. It risks reducing the board to a pilot project rather than affirming it as a cornerstone of our health governance architecture. We must ask ourselves, what message does this send to those we seek to engage? Clinicians, carers, patients and community representatives. What confidence can they place in a board whose existence is time limited, whose mandate is provisional and whose future is uncertain? Governance thrives on clarity, continuity and commitment. This amendment offers none of these. The rationale provided by the panel that insufficient analysis has been undertaken and that the board's creation rests on common sense is, I believe, a mischaracterisation. The proposition is not a leap into the unknown. It builds upon existing Health and Community Services Advisory Board established in 2023. It draws from lessons learned, from stakeholder feedback and growing consensus that our health system requires more than departmental oversight. It requires partnership. To impose an arbitrary review period is to preempt failure. It is to assume that the board may not deliver before it has even begun its work. This is not how we build resilient institutions. We do not ask our schools to prove their worth in 18 months. We do not ask our courts to justify their existence after a trial period. Why then should we treat a governance board tasked with shaping the future of health and care with such conditionality? Let us also consider the practical implications. Reviews require resources, they demand time, attention and administrative capacity. They can distract from the very work that the board is meant to undertake. And should the Assembly decide to disband the board after 18 months, we risk losing momentum, eroding trust and reverting to a fragmented oversight. I do not oppose evaluation and I welcome scrutiny, but evaluation must be embedded, ongoing and constructive, not tethered to a countdown clock. The Minister already holds the authority to review and refine the board's terms of reference. The Assembly retains its power to hold the Minister to account. These mechanisms exist. They are sufficient. We do not need an amendment to duplicate them. We, sir, are at a crossroads. We can choose to empower the model of partnership, one that reflects our shared commitment to health and well-being, or we can choose to constrain it, to bind it with caveats and to treat it as an experiment. I urge you to choose the former. Reject this amendment. Let us affirm our confidence in collaborative governance. Let us give the Partnership Board the time, the space and the stability it needs to succeed. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak on the amendment, Deputy Reniff.
Yes, sir. I think it's worth responding to some of the points made by Deputy Ferre, which are such a bad misrepresentation of what the scrutiny panel is proposing. It's worth recalling that the advisory board was subject to a similar 18-month period, and it is not. We've got a track record here. The advisory board has not stumbled because it was facing an 18-month review. It has not been handicapped by the fact that it knew that that review was coming up. And indeed, these kinds of things are completely normal in a situation where you are setting up a new service. And then Deputy Ferre referred to, would we put a similar 18-month deadline on the courts or the schools? Well, of course not. They've been running for centuries in the case of the courts and one or two centuries in the case of schools. We don't need to do that because there's no need. We know this is a straw man argument. The reason why we suggest putting this limit on this is really twofold. The first is, it is a prudent step when setting up a new organisation to review it. And that was the case with the advisory board. It happens completely normally, and so on. And the second is that, as my attempt to reference back showed, and I think there's general agreement at least with this point, a lot is still to be worked out with the advisory board. The Minister has been quite open about that. And where there is still a lot to be sorted out, that is a very different situation to the one that Deputy Ferry attempted to draw allusions to. And the other point is that he tried to argue that the checks and balances are already in place because the Minister has this power already to review. And the central point of this amendment, the central point, is that we believe that the Assembly should have a chance to review. That it should not just be in the Minister's gift. And I think that is very important, particularly as the review period will fall under a new government with a different minister. And we actually could find it useful, the new Assembly could well find it useful to have that review, given that a new minister may be taking a different view about it. So evaluation is built in anyway, and all this is doing is saying that that should be brought to the Assembly to make a decision. There is an argument put that this will somehow put off people who are thinking of applying. They might think there's no point because the Assembly this is only provisional, that somehow that they will be turfed out in 18 months' time. Well, I would say that they probably aren't involved very much in Jersey politics then, because it is perfectly normal to see these kind of review arrangements. Anybody putting themselves forward for a role in this partnership board will fully expect to be scrutinised. We fully expect their actions to be under review, as indeed is allowed for in the proposition. The only difference being with the amendment that it is the Assembly that will take a view as well. So the idea that this is some kind of barrier that people are going to feel frightened of is a nonsense, I think. And actually, I would suggest it could actually work the other way around, that the point of having a review and knowing there's a review and knowing that the Assembly is going to be looking at this in the future might well focus minds. It might well encourage the members of that board to take an exceptionally positive view, to work at pace, to be constructive, because they know full well, they will know full well that they don't only have to please the minister, they have to satisfy the Assembly that their work is meeting the required standard. I say that, and I don't mean the required standard as if there's some kind of A-level pass or something here. What I mean to say is that they will know that their work is going to be assessed in a way that means that unless it is shown to be adding value, then there is a risk to the existence of the partnership board. And isn't that as it should be? Because if it's not plain to this Assembly that it is adding value, then it should surely be the case that we are able to review it. Now, the Minister has made a comment somewhere, I can't remember where, that sorry, I've lost my train of thought. I'll look down my notes. What is lost, I would say, if we pass this amendment? What is lost? The straw man argument falls away. The idea that this will deter people, I think, is a complete non-starter. The work of reviewing the functions of the board is promised in the proposition anyway, so it doesn't require any new extra effort. It simply means that the board will be subject to review, not just by the Minister, but by this Assembly. And I've remembered the point that I was going to make. The Minister suggested that any member of this Assembly would be free to bring a proposition at any point. That is a completely different business to putting in an 18-month review period. The barrier to entry for a proposition from a member to cancel a board is a completely different kettle of fish. An individual member does not have access to the resources of the government. An individual member is not able to review the actions of the board in the way that a review mandated by this Assembly to be brought by the Minister would do. It is a completely different kettle of fish and is not something that acts as an alternative to this scrutiny amendment. It seems to me that it is an entirely modest amendment with a process that has already been tried and tested in the case of the advisory board. It imposes almost no costs on the process, on the process that is already promised, and simply means that the Assembly can pass a view after 18 months, as it has done and will do. And I noticed there's been no comment at all on the advisory board part of this proposition so far. That is how simple it can be, should the board be functioning. This proposition simply makes sure that stopgap, that backup option is available and builds it in. Again, perfectly normal, good practice. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Balash.
Sir, I rise to support the amendment, which is based upon my reservations about this proposition. My reservations are threefold. First, I am not sure that gathering together a very large number of people around a table is the most effective way of ensuring that all relevant voices are heard. Secondly, as Deputy Renouf has said, the terms of reference of the board are extraordinarily broad. And thirdly, my third reservation is the board actually the right approach? Dealing with the first reservation, the board membership will be a minimum of 12 and a maximum of 21. In my view, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to have a sensible discussion with that number of people. Interestingly, in the email which was circulated earlier today by the primary care body, the same point was made. It's the first point that they made. Workable size. The board must be small and flexible enough to work efficiently. And that, it seems to me, is not what is proposed. The second reservation in relation to the terms of reference and their extent is made clear, I think, by the terms of reference themselves. And I'm looking at page 17 of the Minister's report, which says the partnership board members will work together, A, to understand the health and well-being needs of local people through examination of available information and evidence, B, tackle complex challenges, including how to provide all islanders fair, affordable access to health and care services, how to support islanders to stay healthy and well and economically and socially active, how to provide for those who need treatment, care and support, how health and care services will work together, how to deliver the right service in the right place at the right time, how to support our health and care workforce, how to make best use of our equipment and facilities. It seems to me to be a pretty fair description of the political responsibilities of the minister. And I will only say that if the partnership board engages in all that sphere of activity, it will need a bureaucracy considerably greater than what is proposed. And I think Deputy Renouf made the same point in relation to the stresses under which the bureaucracy currently works. It is true that the report says that the terms of reference will be reviewed by the board within 6 months of its establishment and thereafter every 12 months, which is all well and good. But I would have preferred to see discrete terms of reference which could be embodied in 3 or 4 sentences. And it gives rise to the question, what is the main purpose of the partnership board? Is its main purpose to improve discussion and communications between all healthcare groups in the island? Or is it to be responsible for future healthcare strategy? It seems from the terms of reference that it has both those purposes, but they are, if not in conflict, they are certainly quite separate, and one of which is a very substantial undertaking in itself. The third reservation is the board actually the right approach? And here I have actually been influenced by a conversation with my good friend Deputy Barbara Ward, who sits in front of me. If the board concentrates upon specific issues, a few at a time, and gathers around the table only those who have an interest in that specific issue, I can see that the partnership board might work. The administration is key, ensuring that the right people are talking to the rest of the right people. Only those near the top of the organisation are well informed enough about all the manifold activities of the health department to do that. If they can do that, if they can put the right people in touch with the right people, do we actually need a partnership board? Is it really not possible to engage the primary care body for GPs or the pharmacists or any other part of this huge organism in discussing issues which concern them? Now, I concede, and the Minister, I'm sure, will be pleased to hear this, that I may be completely wrong. I am a mere lawyer, and I am not in any sense an expert on the way in which the health department works. It may be possible for the department, for the partnership board to work out some modus operandi which makes sense and which is doable and constructive. And that's why I support the amendment. The amendment is, if I may be a little crude, sir, a kind of suck it and see kind of enterprise. And the scrutiny panel's recommendation to the Assembly is that the Assembly should allow the Minister to bring this forward to see how it works, and at the end of a period of 18 months to review it. If it is working, fine. If it is not working, then wind it up and do the process of getting the department to work well together in another way. The Minister has lodged a comment upon the panel's amendment, which suggests that there are already provisions for a review, a requirement for the board to review its terms of reference, which I have touched upon, a requirement for the board to publish an end-of-year report, a requirement for the board to undertake further periodic reviews if the Minister thinks that appropriate, and the Minister's ability to disband the board with the agreement of the Assembly if necessary. Those are different, in my view, from the wholesale review of the operation of the Partnership Board and how it is working in fact and in practice, which is what is proposed by the scrutiny panel. That is the purpose of the amendment. Give the Partnership Board an opportunity to prove itself, and if the reservations are not well founded, then all well and good.
Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, Minister.
I think it's unnecessary and disruptive to the successful formation of the Partnership Board. For those members who've read the terms of reference set out in the proposition, they'll see that they already include robust arrangements to review the board. There are 4, and I won't repeat them. I was going to read them out, but Deputy Balash has already done that. These existing mechanisms provide for full transparency as to the board's performance and will support any review that the Minister or the scrutiny panel wish to undertake without the requirement to engage the Assembly, unless they have reason to do so. I've absolutely no doubt that introducing a rigid review point will undermine the confidence of all the prospective board members, especially the GPs and service providers who for so long have had limited and sometimes no trust in the government, and often for good reason. Having spoken to several, I know that it will discourage community providers from acting as board members. To them, and indeed to me, the amendment smacks of another case of government knows best. Notwithstanding the fact that at every one of the consultations, they understood the concept and were keen to get moving and make it work, they will now be facing the prospect of political judgment before they even get to the starting blocks, if indeed they still consider it worthwhile. In my view, this is unnecessary and unwise. Most importantly, the proposed amendments is deaf to the voices of these community-based health and care providers who've long wanted more equity in decision-making, often called for a more collaborative structure, and frequently expressed concerns that our ability to deliver long-term change across the entire health service is hampered by short-term political interventions. I did have other things to say, but I think I'll leave it there and urge members to reject the amendments.
Thank you. Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. Unnecessary and disruptive. They're the words of the Health Minister in his official comments to this amendment, and we've just heard again in the opening of his speech just now. And it's interesting to compare it to the closing remarks of the former Health Minister in her concluding speech on P19 2023, when the Health Advisory Board was set up. Deputy Wilson described an amendment brought by the then PAC chair, Deputy Feltham, to introduce an 18-month trial period for that board as a helpful and collegial amendment. And in fact, it's that amendment which has led to Part A of this proposition being debated today, after what I think many will agree has been a very successful introduction of a board which has been found to be working effectively in all kinds of ways. And I'd just like to take a moment there to reflect on that point and thank all of those who have been involved to date in the establishment of the advisory board and its work so far. And for the record, Part A of the main proposition has my absolute support. What I would note, however, and before I move on to Part B, and I mention it because I do think it does have relevance to the approach that's been taken in the second part as well, is that Part A refers to the need as a result of P170/2010, which I referred to earlier, for the Minister to consult PPC, PAC and the Health and Social Services Scrutiny Panel prior to lodging this proposition. So I sit on two of those bodies, PPC and the Scrutiny Panel, and I therefore attended 2 briefings on the matter. But they were briefings, and the Minister himself referred to them as briefings in his speech earlier today. I wasn't consulted on either occasion, and I raised that at the time, and I was told that the approach actually met the intended aim of P170, but we'll have to agree to disagree on that one. My understanding of the concept to consult with someone is that it involves some kind of active participation, that you're seeking advice from them, conferring with them, having a discussion. But anyway, back to Part B and the plans for a health partnership board and this amendment. Far from trying to be disruptive or unhelpful, the panel in bringing this amendment is seeking to be constructive and to find a balanced way forward which provides members with some comfort as they look to make this decision, that they can look back and review it in 18 months' time. And that approach we can see has worked well with the advisory board. Why wouldn't it work in this case? The Minister says that while the 18-month period did not prevent recruitment of the non-executive directors to the advisory board, the same should not be presumed for local providers. That may be so, but without any firm evidence either way, we should also not presume the opposite to be true. In his comments to this amendment, the Minister states that there are already various review procedures in place, and Deputy Balash has just referred to them. The Minister said he was going to, but wouldn't bother reading them out once again. And I don't want to repeat, but all 4 of those refer to the Minister can then amend the terms of reference. The Minister can publish a response to that end-of-year report. The Minister determines whether the performance is appropriate, and so on. The Minister's ability to disband the board with assembly agreement if necessary. The Minister is the key phrase in all of those measures. The power rests with the Minister. But today, that Minister, the Minister, is asking all of us to agree to this, for this Assembly to give the Partnership Board its backing. And I mention again the purpose of P170 to ensure the appropriate checks and balances of democracy. And so it's why I believe it's really important that this Assembly has a say in the review procedures, and it has an opportunity to take stock in 18 months, as we have done with the advisory board. But because again, it's this Assembly that's being asked to agree this proposition today. It's all well and good saying that any member can bring a rescindment or a proposition to change or remove the board at any point. But we know that in reality, the bar is set very, very high for such a move, and something would have to have gone very seriously wrong, I believe, for an individual member to be moved to bring a private member's proposition to get rid of such a body. And even if they did, the Assembly would likely demand an extremely high burden of justification. It just simply isn't a realistic argument. I take a slightly more pragmatic view than those such as the Friends of Our New Hospital group, who I believe emailed all States members to raise their own questions and concerns. They've got their own list of outstanding questions and conclude by saying that ultimately, if the board is to form strategy, then they do not believe it's the right structure, organisation or budget. I'm encouraged by the show of support from the third sector and think we're lucky to have such organisations and people willing to engage as part of them within our community. I don't doubt that everyone is on the same page here in wanting to do the very best that they can do for the health and care for the people of Jersey. And I'll say again that I really do want to support an approach that puts community engagement and stakeholder involvement at its heart. But I am concerned about the lack of resources for the proposed board, about realistically how much it's going to be able to do in the limited time set aside. Even producing a work plan could take all 4 half days set out for the annual meetings. I worry about the risk of creating a new clique. Will the board mean a minister's less likely to engage with others in the sector, even if they may have a differing view to their representative? They're to be a voice for the sector, but history has taught us it isn't always that simple. There's always politics with a small p in all organisations in a community. Will others be told that their route to sharing ideas and feedback, that's their only route via the board, and have no access to policymakers and ministers as they currently do? The lack of dedicated resources concerns me. We're so often told there's very limited resource within our health department, particularly when it comes to policy development. And the budget raises questions. Using underspends now and keeping that spend relatively low at £77,000 is all well and good, but this proposition effectively asks this Assembly to sign a blank cheque. And I will read from the proposition. The Minister must assess the resources required for the Partnership Board to operate. The Minister must arrange for those resources to be made available. This will generally be within existing HCJ budget allocations or with the agreement of the Council of Ministers. The Minister must ensure the resource requirement is set out in the government plan. And I flag that here today because this Assembly is being asked to endorse that statement and agree to it. You could argue that some of us are overthinking this, that it's a forum for sharing views, ideas and feedback, that anything that gets the right people together in the room and simplifies the landscape in this area can only be a good thing. But when you look at the proposition, it's not just a forum. The responsibilities and tasks states that, among other things, the board will work to resolve day-to-day barriers and oversee delivery of agreed solutions. And that's just one example. That's a lot more than just being a forum. To make this a success and for it to truly improve the health and well-being of islanders and access to care and services, the Partnership Board needs, in my view, to be as robust as possible and last certainly beyond this political term, hopefully beyond the next and long into the future. Introducing an 18-month review point by this Assembly will only help to strengthen that process, and it gives members of this Assembly some comfort when making their decision, especially when there are areas of concern and outstanding questions. I can be comfortable in voting for this proposition if I have that opportunity. Deputy Ferry questioned what message it would send if this Assembly approves this amendment. I'd say it sends a very sensible one. That pilot project, or however you want to term it, that's okay, it's fine. It's a very well tried and tested method, we do it all the time. There's a couple of examples of shadow boards that have been extremely successful, which actually is a very similar approach if you just call it a different name. The housing shadow board became Andiam Homes. The sport shadow board became Jersey Sport. There are numerous others at all sorts of levels in Jersey and elsewhere. So I'd just conclude by saying I think there's some scaremongering going on here today. And I fear that there's a certain group taking a position and digging in their heels. And I really do question why and in whose interests is that.
Thank you. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And actually, my speech will be much shorter because my dear colleague Deputy Stevenson pointed and raised most of the comment. My question to all members sitting here, what's changed? I decided to go to Deputy Feltham amendment and looked at the votes. So I would like to check if every member in this assembly remember how did they vote on the amendment requested 18 months period. Actually, 49 members voted for. If somebody can explain me what's changed. Do we have more clarity than we had now, then? What's changed? We are not telling no for the partnership board. The partnership board would go forward. We're saying thank you for the people who would participate. We know there is no delays, but it's basic, prudent approach from the assembly. What's changed? Apart from somebody saying, trust me, everything will be fine, and instead of saying, actually, let's work together. When you consider the vote, and if you can put hand on your heart and say, do you 100% know that 77,000, this will be more than enough to deliver everything that trusted in the terms of reference? And it would deliver. If you're 100% sure, yeah, decline the amendment. Are you sure how the conflict of interest will be managed? I'm not. And by the way, PC as a scrutiny, I was at the briefing, and I was in the briefing, and I'm grateful for the briefing, but it was briefing. And actually, during that briefing, I have raised exactly the same concern with the minister. How members will be selected, how the conflict of interest will be managed, how the charities that will not be represented on the board will be presenting their voice and will not be dismissed. And it still remains as a question mark. I hope it would work, but I don't know, and I would like to have this another debate like we are having now on advisory board. So the question is, none of us saying that partnership board is the wrong idea. None of us saying that we don't need to work in the partnership. But before we commit indefinitely, at least in practice, the amendment ensures 18 months review, and it should come back to the assembly. And it should be demonstrated that the board fit for purpose as any other board. So it's not a delay, it's a prudence. And I would expect members to ensure that we are making decision based on full evidence presented, at least after 18 months to review. Thank you.
Very much. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. So, Deputy Gardner asked what's changed. I think there's actually quite a difference in terms of the history and the trajectory of the advisory board and this partnership board. I'm going to point back to the time that the advisory board was set up by the previous Minister for Health, and it was quite a radical proposal at the time. You know, who were these people coming in and this sort of thing, and indeed controversial. And what was interesting, and I think has been the cause of some disappointment, perhaps, you know, strong emotion within this State's Assembly, was that her foresight, her decision was actually supported by the next government following a vote of no confidence where this matter was raised. And that is what happened. And it still is supported. But the Partnership Board has a different history, at least as far as I can see. And I go back to this proposition in 2012 that was approved by the State's Assembly, which was to approve the redesign of health and social services, as outlined in a report dated 11th September 2012, and requesting the Council of Ministers to bring forward proposals for priorities for investment in hospital services and detailed plans for a new hospital. Gosh, remember that. And also the proposals to develop a new model of primary care, including general medical practitioners, dentists, high street optometrists and pharmacists. And that's where there is something really quite different there. This was the start. And the actual report that got approved by the State's Assembly was headed "The Need to Redesign Health and Social Care in Jersey," and was looking at what was regarded as a more integrated system, because basically the health services were being driven more or less by the hospital management. And let's just say we had charities like Family Nurse, we had the doctors, these people who actually felt that they weren't being budgeted adequately, they were being left out. And so what happened then? Well, then there were proposals for this primary care model. And what happened then? There were objections because guess what? Government didn't consult adequately with those services who were outside those hospital-dominated management. And all of this, of course, was also recognised in the report of the Controller and Auditor General, and for the need for a redesigned health service that has become more and more crucial and urgent, as recognised by the Jersey Fiscal Policy Panel, as we recognise even now as we've had to rebase the health budget. Now, when I spoke to some people within the health community about, well, what's the problem with this primary care model? People who actually were outside the hospital management, outside the government, but nevertheless delivering care in the community. Some of the actual statements I had was, well, no, I don't even get it. Where's the needs analysis? Where's the gaps analysis? These people are actually saying, well, this is how we have to deliver as professionals. We can't see that this is going on in a way that actually will enable us to have confidence in this. And it just isn't really properly involving us. Now, I know that some people have raised this apparent confusion that you've got a partnership board where people are from different sectors there to give a particular viewpoint, but they're not representing a sector. Well, how do you do that anyway? I mean, even I, as a state's member, can't represent everybody all at once, often. Sometimes I have to take one view or the other. So what sort of burden would you be putting on people in terms of saying you represent them? That's not to say they shouldn't consult. There still are these other bodies. But for me, I actually think that what is being overlooked by perhaps by the scrutiny panel, which has new people on it who perhaps haven't looked back at this whole history, is that this isn't actually something like the advisory board. This is something actually much more about the integration of a health service. When the Controller and Auditor General pointed out that we have been using models evolved in the UK that the island couldn't afford. We needed an integrated service. We needed people who were delivering services outside the hospital to feel comfortable that they at least were getting some sort of proper voice heard in all of this and not being pushed aside by perhaps managers who were focusing more on the hospital and thinking that was the number one thing to be dealt with. So, whilst I respect the work that's been done by scrutiny, I will urge the state's members, and particularly I'm sure that my apologies to those who have been in the States Assembly a long time and perhaps remember all this history, but I would very much urge rejection of the amendment, just so that we can have people in place from these different areas of of delivery of health services. We can't have them all. It does need to be a manageable number, but simply to have people with that expertise informing the way forward, and this was actually, I think even the report was headed something like the way forward for health or something, the proposed new way forward for health and social. Let's carry on and get forward.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Connie St Martin.
Sir, in fear of repeating what has already been said, I'm keeping my speech short. I'd just like to make it clear that I am in favour of the Partnership Board, but I'd also like, and I'd really like the Partnership Board to work, but I am concerned about the lack of resources, along with other concerns which the amendment seeks to address. I concur with what my fellow members of the scrutiny panel have already said. And if I thought that this amendment was unnecessary and disruptive, I would not and could not support it. And I hope that members will see that this is a sensible amendment which seeks to improve the proposition. And I urge members to vote for the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Connie Tubbs, any other member wish to speak on the amendment? Connie Tubbs, St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I do wonder if members are making over much of this. I come to this debate with an open mind, and I wonder if I'm the only one disappointed to hear some of the partisan remarks made by two sides of the argument. I find that disappointing. I align myself basically with the comments already made by Deputy Balash. He described himself as a mere lawyer. I'm one worse than that. I'm a mere English lawyer. But I like to think that most lawyers have an element of common sense, and it seems to me to be common sense that if we're establishing a new body or two new bodies, it is prudent to do some rain check on their performance after a limited time. That is not to decry or undermine the intention of the Minister. I wish the board well. I very much hope that things will sort themselves out in that meantime, but I do not see why this amendment should undermine the proposition, or why members of those boards should feel it undermines them either. So to any other comments made by other members, I am inclined to support the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Right, Chair. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate and call upon Deputy Doublé to respond.
Thank you, sir. And I've been listening with interest to all of the contributions to the debate. I'll briefly respond to some of them. Deputy Ferry was the first speaker and made some interesting comments, I thought, which I wanted to challenge, actually. And one of the comments he made was that this shows institutional fragility if we build in this 18-month review. And I wanted to challenge that because I think, on the contrary, our approach on scrutiny is a very robust one, and we make no apology for that. And any new board or body should be able to stand up to such scrutiny, and this would show that that board itself was robust. So it is indeed the opposite. He also made some comments comparing the board, the proposed board, to a school or a court, and to say that we don't give trials of those institutions. And in fact, I have some experience here, sir, in schools. We do, and newly qualified teachers have to complete a year, a newly qualified teacher year, when they're working in schools. The same is true for roles such as police officers. This is pretty standard practice when it comes to membership of roles like that and public bodies. And he also stated that the review is a distraction. Now, I want to make it clear that there is not actually any new reviews being proposed. It's the decision point that is being proposed here. The Minister himself has noted that several reviews of progress are embedded already. So this isn't asking for new reviews. This is putting the decision-making power with the States Assembly. And Deputy Stevenson made that point very well. My Vice Chair, Deputy Renouf, he mentioned that some of the points I've just made, he called them a straw man argument. And another point that he also made was around the 18-month trial period actually galvanising the new board. And he made some excellent points. That was one of them. And I really agree with this. I think that it will give that incentive to perform to the highest standards, which I have confidence that that board has potential to do, and I would like to see that happen. And he also reminded us that we're not losing anything if we approve this amendment today. Deputy Balash outlined his three main concerns, and I'm grateful for all of my panel members that have contributed to consideration of the amendments and to the debate today. And I appreciate Deputy Balash's rigorous approach and the concerns that he has outlined, and the concerns outlined by all of my panel members. Actually, many of them were kind of slightly different concerns, and they are numerous. And that provides further evidence, sir, that we do need time for all of these varied concerns to be tested. The Minister states that there are existing mechanisms for transparent review, And I think that this 18-month period gives the best chance of those reviews being fully considered. And he stated that this amendment has been called Government Knows Best, which again, I thought that was interesting because, of course, this amendment is the opposite of that, sir. It's a scrutiny amendment. And the purpose of scrutiny is to hold government to account on behalf of the public, of the people of Jersey, because, of course, it's our electorate who know best, and we work on their behalf. So this amendment puts the power not within the government and the minister, but it puts the power in our parliament and with states members who we are all here representing the Jersey public. So it puts the power in their hands. Deputy Stevenson, another valued member of my panel, she referred to the speech of a previous minister who accepted an 18-month trial for the advisory board and mentioned the collegiate approach that was referenced. I just want to encourage the Assembly really to make a collegiate decision today, because sometimes compromise is necessary, and this is a compromise amendment. And compromise is often how we make good decisions, by tweaking things that come before us. And Deputy Gardiner reminded us what has changed since the Assembly approved the 18-month trial period of the advisory board. Well, I don't think that the principles of that have changed at all. A point that I wanted to make, sir, before I ask for the appel, is many of the speeches have touched on the very broad remit of this board. And I know that potential board members might be listening to this debate today. And I do want to put on record, actually, and to echo what another of my panel members, Constable Shenton, mentioned, the Constable of St. Martin, that she wants this board to succeed. I think that this board actually is a fairly good idea. I think it has potential to make some positive changes. And I think the amendment is complementary to that. And I think when future members of that board are doing that work, having this 18-month touch point in place also gives them the reassurance that any concerns that they have as members of that board during the operation of the board, that they will be able to raise those, and that there is an opportunity to resolve those concerns at the 18-month point. And it also, another thing that the 18-month checkpoint would do, it would give that board a very firm mandate. Now, I feel today, sir, that we are likely to approve Part A of the main proposition, which relates to the establishment of the advisory board. And I think having that 18-month period for that board, and if it is confirmed today by the Assembly, that gives that board a very firm and a very strong mandate in doing the work that they do. So I think having the same 18-month period for the partnership board has the potential to strengthen that board. And therefore, I would have liked the Minister to accept the amendment and to welcome it, because I see it as a helpful and constructive amendment. I'll stop there, sir, but just to thank everybody who's spoken and to ask members to support this, what I think is a balanced and reasonable amendment based on the evidence found by the scrutiny panel. And I ask for the appel, please, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the amendment to P52. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The amendment has been defeated. 16 votes pour, 30 votes contre, no abstentions. Very well. We now continue with the debate on the proposition not as amended. And does any member wish to speak on the main proposition?
So can I ask your help with a point of order?
Yes, certainly.
Is there a mechanism by which we can ascertain whether the Minister is going to take this in parts or not when it comes to the vote? Because that might affect how speeches are made.
It's a matter for the Minister whether he takes it in part, but he can be asked whether he will take it in parts. Are you able to indicate whether you're prepared to take the matter in parts, Minister?
Yes, I think under the circumstances, if we're going to introduce a board, it has to stand on its own merits, and I think we should vote for them separately, sir.
So you will not be taking it in parts. You will. I didn't hear what you said. Take it in parts. Yes, very well. Well, then that's what will happen. Does any member wish to speak on the main proposition? Deputy Barbara Ward.
Thank you, sir. I rise to convey my support, not just as an Assistant Minister for Health, but actually as a health professional, having worked for some 45 years in healthcare, from a student nurse to modern matron and senior manager. And I've seen many, many changes in bringing about different structures. I'm sure everyone would agree that healthcare provision needs to evolve, move forward and further develop. We just cannot stand still and ignore new innovations like digital, AI, new treatment and surgical approaches. The health service cannot continue as is, which is clearly disjointed. Change is needed, but in the right way, working in partnership with our highly skilled professionals across the island. The Minister's already set out in his opening speech the reasons including the many briefings and consultations he's conducted, which has brought us to the proposition that he laid before us. The emphasis is clearly about partnership for all involved in healthcare, from the cradle to the grave. From prevention and treatments in the community or in a healthcare setting across the island, be clearly joined up. I describe it as trying to thread and make a pearl necklace, all gems, all joined together. Another way to describe the partnership board approach is to an umbrella, with all the major participants involved and working in one direction as an island health team, and to get away from some silo thinking. Every aspect of healthcare has an equal place in the delivery of the health provision on this partnership board. The partnership approach will, of course, take some time, sir, to bed in. We know this. But we must be supported to do so. We cannot stand still. Without this support from members today, we will find ourselves with a brand new hospital in 4 or 5 years' time without a cohesive island healthcare team approach to support and complement such. I won't repeat what the Minister stated and the supporting evidence provided by the interested parties, but, sir, may I encourage members to support the Minister's proposition and let the Health Ministerial team, healthcare professionals and interested healthcare providers get on with the job of bringing this to fruition for all our future island healthcare provision. I cannot finish, sir, without extending my sincere thanks to the officers who have worked tirelessly in helping us bring this work forward. Thank you, sir, and members, for listening. Please support the proposition set out by the Health Minister today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Doublé.
Thank you, sir. I am pleased to follow the Assistant Minister, and I will be supporting the first part of this proposition, and I wanted to echo, I think it was Deputy Stevenson earlier thanked all of those who have been a part of the board. And I think it's fair to say that the board so far has been really quite impressive. I am really looking forward to seeing how they progress if we do approve this first part of the proposition today. I wanted to draw members' attention to our comments, which have been referred to, and I haven't had a chance to talk about the body of those comments as it relates to the advisory board. So I just wanted to highlight a few things which I would hope that the Minister could respond to when he sums up, please. So one of the things that the panel have highlighted in our comments is the appointment of a permanent chair. So we would like to understand whether the Minister will be appointing a permanent chair and what the time frame for that would be. This was one of the things that was raised from stakeholder feedback. Now, we understand that the board did conduct a survey as part of the review process. However, the panel notes that only 2 responses were received to this survey. And we do have some concerns that not all of the potential problems that could have been examined were not actually raised as a result of that very small number of people completing the survey. What we would have liked to see would have been a staff survey as part of this review, and the absence of giving this opportunity to staff to comment on the board's cultural and operational impact does seem to be a missed opportunity. So if there is a way to build this in going forwards, then the panel would welcome that. We also looked at the partnership working and whether how that is going to work between the 2 boards, how duplication is going to be avoided, and how the work of the partnership board will be communicated with the advisory board and vice versa. I know this was part of the information that was requested earlier in the day, but I hope that the Minister would feel able to elaborate on that. Formal external review is something that the panel would also recommend. And so something in terms of the second part of this proposition, I'm not yet sure how I'm going to vote on that actually, now that the amendment is not part of the main proposition. But one thing I would like to raise, and again, I would like the Minister to respond to this and potentially other ministers if they're going to speak, is that while there is remuneration for members of the partnership board as part of the proposals, I note that there are other boards within other departments, for example, within the education department, that some boards that do have statutory, that are established on a statutory basis. And I'm not sure that all of the members of boards like that are remunerated in a similar way. And what I'd like to understand is, does this set a precedent if we approve the terms of reference of this new partnership board today? How does that impact other boards across different departments? This might actually be a question for the Attorney General. And I want to understand how the really valuable time and expertise from individuals who often representing charitable bodies, and they are invited to groups such as this, and their expertise is critical. How is their time going to be recompensed in other similar boards if this is something that we're starting to do on this board? So that's another question that I have there, sir. But I will leave it there. Our comments are available for members to read, and I think most of the points within our comments have been raised in previous sections of the debate, so I will leave it there, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. I hadn't meant to say a great deal in summing up because everybody's heard all of the arguments, and I know that the time is getting on. There are a couple of things I can say. Certainly in terms of setting precedent, it's not something I'd considered, but I think what we have to consider is if we're going to ask people to spend a reasonable amount of time participating in making decisions for the health service, it's difficult to expect them to sit at a table with other members who have been paid for their time and have them sitting there not doing anything. So I think I can only deal with that in isolation, and I'm not really in a position to pass comment on what precedent that may or may not set. What I will say, sir, is that a lot of the focus in the debate today has been on what we're proposing to do, but there's been very, very little focus on the muddle that we're dealing with at the moment and the administrative cost. And it's my opinion that as this moves forward and gets further refined, that the efficiencies that will be achieved by having a formal structure will actually save a considerable sum of money, and some of that money as we go forward can be diverted into the running of the partnership board. When it comes to the appointment of a scrutiny, not a scrutiny chair, sorry, a chair for the advisory board, no, I really am keen not to do that. The 5 members at the moment work extremely well together. They have an interim who wants to continue. It works extremely well, and the personal dynamics in these situations are very important, and I really don't want to put that at risk. In that regard, I'd be very happy to try and arrange for either the chair or perhaps even the advisory board to meet with scrutiny and talk that through themselves, and I think that might prove to be reassuring. So, in closing, I'm glad that people can come to the table without feeling that there's the possibility of it being disrupted. That said, I'm extremely keen that certainly while it remains within my ability to do so, I shall be as open as I can, and the board will be as accountable as possible at all stages. And I want the Assembly to remain engaged in the progress of that board, because I think it's vital for everybody, sir. And with that, I call for the appel.
Call for the appel. Let us call for, invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on P52. Sorry? Oh, yes, you take it in parts. Indeed, thank you very much. Part A. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote on Part A. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part A is adopted, 45 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Now I ask the greffier to reset the vote, and the vote now is on Part B, and I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the greffier to close the voting. Part B has been adopted, 33 votes pour, 7 votes contre, 5 abstentions.
Over the 7 and the 5.
7 and the 5, yep.
Those members voting contre, the Connétable St Lawrence, Clement, and deputies Balash, Miles, Alex Curtis, Wilson, and Andrews, And those members abstaining, entities Moore, Renner, Jean, Stevenson and Doublé.
Very well. The next item is the draft Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Limit Jersey Amendment Regulations, P53, lodged by the Minister for the Environment. The main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the greffier to read the citation. Minister, you've lodged an amendment to the regulations. Do you wish them to be taken as amended?
Yes, please, sir.
Could we read the citation then, if that includes the amendment as amended? Oh, very well. Very well. Well, yes, please.
Draft Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Limits Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000, the states make these regulations under Articles 6 and 29 of the Sea Fisheries Jersey Law 1994.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. Sir, and I rise just to propose an amendment as amended by myself to the draft Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Jersey Amendment Regulations. Members may remember this was down to be debated at the last sitting, but in order to reflect the amount of work we had to do there, I offered to defer this. So in order to do that, the amendment alters the commencement date of the change for the minimum size of lobster from the 16th of September to the 13th of October this month. So the Sea Fisheries Jersey Law 1994 provides the framework for regulating sea fishing and conserving fish in our waters. Under that legislation, the Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Limits Regulations is the way we control the minimum size by which fish and shellfish can be landed, offered for sale, sold or retained by fishermen within our territorial waters for fisheries management purposes. This proposal to the 2025 amendment to increase the minimum size from 88 to 89 millimetres is a change that follows the 1 millimetre increase last year that I brought to this Assembly. And this is the second of 3 increases to bring the minimum size to 90 millimetres next year. As stated last July, the use of minimum size restrictions on the landing, sale and retention of fish is a tried and tested method employed by fisheries managements across the world. The rationale is simple in that the minimum size allows a species to reproduce at least once, but often multiple times, before they're caught in a fishery. It works particularly well with shellfish that are robust and have a high survival level after capture and release. Our lobsters are the mainstay of our commercial fleet and part of the island's cultural and culinary identity. Lobster fishing had a boom between 2017 and 19, when nearly every other pot would produce a lobster that could be landed for sale. However, now catch levels have returned to those of a decade ago, when only 1 in 6 pots now have a lobster to land. Working with representatives of the commercial and recreational fishing fleets and with marine resources officers, a suite of management measures has been proposed to safeguard and rebuild the stock. I would like to put on record my thanks to the members of the Lobster Working Group for all their contributions and commitment to the designing of the package. Increasing the minimum size forms the keystone of those measures, and so is the first to be introduced. Further measures, as outlined in the recent lobster report published by my department, will follow in due course. Excuse me. This size increase will apply to both commercial and recreational fishers wishing to retain lobsters in our waters. The proposed change will also support the continued viability of our sustainable certified lobster fishery under the Marine Stewardship Council, a certification we jointly share with our Norman neighbours. Increasing the size limit also increases the weight of each animal landed and therefore the price received by the commercial fishers, supporting a long-term sustainable fishing economy. I hope members will agree that these are sensible, scientifically robust and stakeholder-supported measures that seek to further enhance the conservation and management of this important local species. And I urge members to support the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? No member wishes to speak on the principles. I close the debate. Those in favour of adopting the principles kindly show.
Could we have the appel, please?
As called for, I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is on the principles of P53. I ask the Secretary to open the voting and members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, and I ask the Secretary to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 42 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions. Does the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise the matter?
No, sir.
Now come to second reading, Minister. You have an amendment. You indicated you'd like to take the regulation as amended.
Yes, sir. And if I could propose these two amendments en bloc.
Well, can I just ask, the members agree we can take the amendment as amended, the regulation as amended? Yes. In which case you propose en bloc.
Thank you.
Is it seconded for second reading en bloc? Does any member wish to speak in second reading? Those in favour of adopting kindly, that is called for. The vote is on the amendment to the regulations in second reading. Ask the Secretary to open the voting and members to vote. If members had the opportunity of casting their vote, ask the Secretary to close the voting. The amendment regulations have been adopted in second reading, 45 votes for, no votes contre, no abstentions. Do you propose in third reading, Minister?
I do, sir. Thank you.
Is it seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, sir. It's just to say I fully support the Minister in his recommendations. Fishing is going through a difficult time right now, and any measure that helps make for a more sustainable fishing industry is to be supported by me. But on a slightly lighter note, I was particularly intrigued by the reference to the Lobster Working Group, and I was wondering if the Minister would mind telling us about the membership in terms of reference to the Lobster Working Group. So.
Deputy Chair.
Thank you, sir. And it was just to say that though scrutiny was minded not to call in or put any comments, we regularly ask questions with the Minister in our hearings on these important issues. And I would like to ask the Minister to extend thanks to the Marine Resources Department, who took the scrutiny panel out in the summer. And we were able to ask many questions on all the different range of issues marine resources focus on, and including enforcement, which is an important part of the work that they do within this element, because of course it's not just about the measurements, but it's about ensuring that the lobsters are not taken at a smaller than they should be, and it's subscribed in this law, and enforcement is just as important. So I'd like to thank the Marine Resources Department and the Minister for helping scrutiny to understand a bit more about what goes on in marine resources. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Just a brief question, just to ask the Minister whether this is mirrored by our French counterparts, sir.
Any other member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Tadier.
I think I might have raised this in the past, sir, but could the Minister consider whether or not in future, if it's about managing lobster stock, whether there needs to also be a maximum size for lobster that they can be taken at, the rationale being that if lobsters have grown to a particularly large length, therefore they're a lot older, then they actually should be left in the ocean because they're good specimens to breed, and also whether or not there exists any restrictions around taking female lobsters at times when they're when they can breed, and so if there isn't anything at the moment, is that something that maybe the Minister would consider in the future, sir?
Any other member wish to speak in third reading? No other member wishes to speak in third reading? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir. I'm grateful to members for their interest. If I might just address the comments in reverse order. The subject of taking buried lobsters, which mentioned by Deputy Taddy, is one that a perennial one that comes up a lot, and we're challenged quite often in Jersey as to why we don't ban this. There's a lot of evidence for both sides of the argument, but I would say very briefly that when you ban it, we find that in other jurisdictions the eggs are either brushed off the lobsters before they're brought ashore, or the lobsters are chemically treated at sea, so the eggs fall off. So there are ways around getting a ban on buried lobsters not to work. And then, of course, the other issue around the fact that if you take or you don't take female lobsters out of the sea, you do end up with a disproportionate balance of males and females. But it is one that is constantly kept in review, and so I can assure the Deputy that we do that. As for maximum size, that is certainly something that needs to be looked at, and the Deputy's quite right. So when a lobster gets to a particular size, it's done well to get there and maybe should be deserved to be left in the sea. But he makes a good point. Lobsters that are exceptionally big obviously have the potential to do a huge amount of reproduction and the amount of eggs they produce and their ability to reproduce. So that is something that is looked at as well, and I believe is one of the measures that the group will consider in the future. These measures apply to everybody who fishes in our waters, so regardless of nationality. So it's Jersey Fleet and the commercial fleets from Brittany and Normandy. I thank the chairman of my scrutiny panel for her extended thanks to the team that work on this. I have a fantastic team at Marine Resources Department who work diligently on all these matters of marine conservation and management. And finally, sir, I just respond to the Economic Minister about the Lobster Working Group, and of course the Lobster Working Group are a group of people who work with lobsters. In all seriousness, I would say they're made up of commercial representatives from the commercial fishing and the recreational fishing fleets on the island, and they get together very specifically to talk about lobster matters. And I'll leave it there and thank members for their support. Call for the appel, sir.
As called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is in third reading on P53, and I ask the referee to open the voting and members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote, then I ask the referee to close the voting. The regulations are adopted in third reading, 45 votes for, no votes contrary, no abstentions. Very well, the next item of public business is the statutory pre-sale agreement for standard residential property transactions, P61 lodged by Deputy Andrews. The main respondent is the Chief Minister. An amendment has been lodged by the Council of Ministers. Deputy Andrews, are you accepting the amendment?
Yes, sir.
Very well. Are members content to take the proposition as amended?
No, sir.
Sorry, I didn't hear who.
I would like it taken separately, sir.
Very well. Well, in which case it will have to be dealt with at the time that it comes along. Very well. So we'll deal with the amendment separately. So I'd ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, all residential property transactions must include a legally binding pre-sale agreement between seller and purchaser, excluding the following types of transactions. 1, intra-family or intra-company transactions. 2, government or arm's-length body transfers. 3, auctions or forced sales. 4, transfer of shared transfer real estate. 5, transfer of shares owned in real estate. And 6, guest houses, hotels and other temporary accommodation transactions. B, that pre-sale agreements must include a financial penalty to be paid by the seller or purchaser should they default on the agreement without a legitimate reason, to be stipulated in law. C, to request the Chief Minister to establish a list of exclusions to the imposition of a financial penalty as set out in B, including but not limited to 1. Mortgage refusal following an adverse survey, 2. Substantial damage to the property such as fire or natural disaster, and 3. Chain collapse where a party was reliant on a preceding sale. D. To request the Chief Minister to bring forward for approval the necessary legislation to give effect to this decision no later than June 2028.
Thank you, sir. I know many members will be fully aware that I'm very passionate about pre-sale agreements. I think they have a real purpose of protecting many islanders who I've engaged with, and many of them have shared their stories about being gazumped, and some, in fact, have recently been gazundered as well. And, you know, when you look at other European states, they have a greater degree of regulation, but they also have a good level of enforcement as well to prevent such circumstances of gazumping and gazundering. And that's why I do really support the need for a law. I think we do need to try and modernise the property transaction process here in Jersey. I think it's rather archaic, and I think it also needs to probably be digitalised as well. And I think it's something that will evolve in time. I don't think we can be too fixated on just bringing forward a law and remaining content with that law. If there are evolvements that allow us to change and to improve a process, then we should always be open to what those opportunities are, sir. But as far as I'm concerned, as a backbencher politician, sir, when I used Facebook and I boosted several posts, and I was trying to engage as many people as I can here to understand their experience of Jersey's property transaction, during the property transaction process. And for many of them, they were sharing their utter disappointment at the fact that they had spent thousands of pounds and the transaction was never executed. It was because the counterparty had pulled out. In fact, I'm aware of at least 3 cases where individuals were gazundered and it was in excess of £100,000. This is such a significant topic, and for many people, they were very willing to engage. And I think we could really see that on the bailiwick post on Facebook. There's about 310 likes, and many people were saying, gosh, this needs to be in law, because so many people have been affected by this. And I think it's disappointing, sir, when the Connétable St Mary was part of the property transaction review. They did a lot of good work, and unfortunately the political executive of the day, and that was Deputy Gorst, who was then the Chief Minister, did not accept several of the recommendations that I feel are key recommendations. In fact, the first recommendation was about bringing forward a consultation with the relevant stakeholders to ascertain their views on whether pre-sale agreements should conform as part of a standard real estate transaction process. Now, there are a few caveats as well, because I know a few people have probably been a bit concerned about what does this mean in terms of share transfer property. Well, share transfer property is usually subject to a share transfer agreement, and so if you were looking at a law for share transfer, that would have to come in separately to any proposed law regarding this proposition, sir. Because share transfer doesn't form part of being a standard real estate transaction. It operates under company law. And I know some people raised that with me, and I had to respond just to provide some clarity for them. Now, I think with many of the behaviours that have been exhibited, the reason why people are gazumping and gazundering others is because they can get away with it. There's no financial deterrent. You know, in France, there's a financial penalty, and it's in place to stop that sort of behaviour. It's to address the root of the problem. And so for me, that's the reason why I am of the firm view that financial penalty is necessary. I think it is the right thing to do, and it will cut out that immoral and unethical behaviour. And I think we've seen too much of it. You know, if you look at the statistics in previous years, when we were seeing 1,900 transactions, that was a period when a lot of people were being gazumped. I mean, it's still happening now, don't get me wrong, but it's at a lesser level. But back then, you know, when we were going through that period of low interest rates, there were so many people being gazumped. And also with property change as well, collapsing entirely. Many people spending money on lawyers, removal firms, bank charges, the surveys. It all adds up. And, you know, the last time when we debated this, there was, in fact, a lady who I believe lived in St Brelard, and she contacted me to say, look, I've lost £13,000 recently. So I'm really pleased to see that you've raised this, but I'm disappointed with the outcome of the debate. And there wasn't really much I could say in response to that, apart from, well, I'll bring it back, because I strongly believe that this is absolutely essential. And I know there are several other members, in fact, who are supportive of pre-sale agreements, but you know, I think it's also a good opportunity as well, as I originally asked, that, you know, a consultation does take place before any law is brought forward. So I think I'll leave it there, and I hope to hear from several of my colleagues. Thank you.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Now, there is an amendment to the proposition brought by the Council of Ministers. I ask the greffier to read the amendment.
Page 2, paragraph A, for the words "that all" substitute "to undertake a consultation on the effectiveness of the residential property transaction process and consider whether." For the word "must" substitute "should." For the word "exclude" insert the words "which may." Page 2, paragraph B, for the word "must" substitute "may." After the words "legitimate reason," for the word "to" substitute "and consideration given as to whether this should." Page 2, paragraph C, for the word "establish" substitute "consider." Page 2, paragraph D, for the words "bring forward for approval the necessary legislation to give effect to this decision," substitute "present a report to the Assembly on the outcome of the consultation on the effectiveness of the property transaction process, including the role and scope of the use of pre-sale agreements and whether these should be considered as part of future legislation." And for the word 2028, substitute 2027.
Chief Minister.
So the Housing Minister is acting as rapporteur. Thank you, sir. And can I start by thanking Deputy Andrews for once again raising this issue and for the engagement that we had on several occasions in the run-up to this debate and the run-up to producing an amendment to it. And I was pleased that he indicated to the Assembly that he wishes to accept the amendment. So members may remember previously Deputy Andrews had brought a proposition P34 on this subject, which the Assembly rejected. The amendment to P61 now is materially different to P34 in that it proposes a consultation which will be wider than simply on the issue of pre-sale agreements, but instead looking across the board at the entirety of the residential property transaction process. And it does that, sir, with the intention of trying to be as wide-looking as possible to improve that process and help people who are looking to buy and sell their homes, and touch upon those other elements that pre-sale agreements themselves wouldn't necessarily solve. Deputy Andrews has he's got his finger on the pulse on this issue, I think, to a degree, and he's spoken about the people who he's engaged with who have found themselves suffering that huge disappointment and no doubt heartache that comes when you believe that you're about to enter a transaction only to find the rug pulled from beneath your feet that will make that, that can end up ruining that entirely in some instances. And Deputy Andrews is right to a degree that an element of use of pre-sale agreements in some of those situations would resolve that as an issue for some. However, that wouldn't be the case across the board, where there are other issues that could come up that don't necessarily constitute gazumping by its strict definition, but could still lead to a transaction falling through and somebody in a different situation to gazumping or gazundering ending up having their heart broken as well by not being able to go through with a transaction that they had their heart set on. And so by widening it out in this way, we're able to commit to beginning the work to looking at the entirety of that process and covering off all of the different elements of it that can affect and impose difficulties on people when they're going through the process of buying or selling a new home. That will, of course, involve looking at pre-sale agreements and the role that they'll play in that, but it will also involve looking at other elements to that too, sir.
I would wager that a more widespread use of the seller's survey would probably help encounter issues earlier on in the process. That would enable people to find difficulties earlier on and resolve those rather than get to that stressful point towards the end of a transaction process where you're most worried about things going wrong at that point. And so it will give us time to come back, and it will be the next assembly that will have to pick this up, of course, but have something that hopefully is a bit more substantial, not just looking at pre-sale agreements, but looking at other elements as well. And it'll be down to the next assembly then to determine how best to move forward from it. But in any event, anyone with an interest in this subject will then be able to use that work that's produced as a result of that, including by engaging with those in the industry, and take it for what it is and hopefully move forward with it. So that's the rationale behind this amendment. I'm grateful for Deputy Andrews. We met twice beforehand to talk about this. I'm grateful for him for highlighting it as an issue, and grateful to him for being open-minded about helping us forge the best way forward to make a difference, which I know is his intention behind his proposition. So I thank him for that and hope that the Assembly will agree to this amendment on that basis, sir.
Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I hope I haven't caught members off guard by requesting this to be taken separately to the main proposition. It is the second time I've done so in short succession, and I would say if members would like a little more time, it would be helpful for those who are looking to accept amendments to maybe indicate to the Assembly, as I don't wish to, I would have assumed that this would have been taken separately, hence I didn't provide advance notice. I'd like to thank the Housing Minister for his opening remarks on this, and I will try to decide how I can split my comments on this amendment to the main proposition. The Minister has taken straight off the bat why he sees P61 as different to P34, but I still believe we should have a conversation about this. Members did reject P34, titled Consultation and Report on Pre-Sale Agreements for Land and Property Transactions. I will say I am in huge favour of constant reform and perhaps some radical reform to our property transaction system. My question and my concern is how we do that. The concern principally to this amendment is it feels like we're trying to find a passable outcome which is far from what the proposer of the main proposition actually has requested the Assembly debate upon. The title of the main proposition is Statutory Pre-Sale Agreements for Standard Residential Property Transactions. It is fairly tight in scope and fairly, again, I should say, deliberate in what it achieves. It wishes the Assembly to create a in-principle decision for new legislation for statutory pre-sale agreements. Ministers clearly don't agree that we can make that decision on the basis of the proposition in front of us. And I would argue that this amendment turns the proposition far from the intention to something that doesn't just fail to debate the Deputy's aim, but it expands into a broader topic that the Minister has highlighted, the transaction process. But we heard from the Minister in his opening remarks on the amendment, there is still almost a slight identity crisis that this amendment has. It wishes to focus on an area of consultation that the Deputy of the proposer wants, but also expand it wider. But here's where I have a challenge with that. In shoehorning in a passable proposition with consultation, I'm concerned that what is proposed is actually the wrong way to start what is a very significant work stream. Reviewing and modernising the processes and legislation that underpin property transactions and that of the public registry should be a pressing area of work for this island to pursue. Carving off a section of this for the sake of saving a proposition that members should vote on in their own rights is not the best way to start what I think is an incredibly important piece of work. And I will briefly expand on what I mean by this. Jersey's conveyancing model of registering land and property transactions has a history of over 400 years, as members will know. For these years, it has primarily been within the jurisdiction of the courts, not the Assembly. And there are many ways you can structure how land transactions occur and are recorded. Changes to our existing system could be as small as introducing the statutory safeguards Deputy Andrews wants, to moving our contract to refer to what's called a cadastral map, which documents land parcels, as Guernsey has, to moving further away to a land registry, which keeps record of who owns what, rather than our contract-based and deeds-based process. And that's a huge amount of choice that we have in deciding how we modernise our property transaction system, a system that is incredibly old, has had revisions over time, and clearly its remit falls beyond just currently that of this Assembly. So I would argue, sir, starting with a consultation is the wrong way round to evaluate the best way to ensure our processes are best fit. Members will notice that the amendment proposes consultation is undertaken by the Strategic Housing and Regeneration Team, and that this can be fit within existing capacity. I won't spend time on the different remarks to P34, in which it said consultation by this team would divert important work of that team, but it is nonetheless said to be led by that team. Sir, in trying to fit this workstream into that, I think it misses other bodies that are responsible for the work. You will know, sir, that the responsibility for this area still extends beyond the government and the Assembly, and crucially, what's missing, in my view, in this amendment is the remit of the Jersey Legal Information Board, which acts, in essence, as a research and development arm of the courts. As a board member of JLIB, like yourself, you will no doubt recall, sir, that research and changes to our existing processes have previously stemmed from JLIB, including reforms of the Jersey Land Registry system, incremental changes to conveyancing, the move from French to English, the move to put contracts online, and JLIB have also performed work researching the potential use of blockchain in land registry. So work continues. I won't expand too much here on this amendment, sir, but my key challenge is in understanding how we take forward what is a very large piece of work and one that should be considered, trying to fit an agreement from the state into what I think is a very different proposition is not the best way for us to be making decisions. This is a huge piece of policy, and respectfully, we should actually start with research, not consultation, and once we've decided which bodies should research, which ones will be accountable for driving change, and perhaps agreeing amongst ourselves and those associated bodies the extent of change we're interested in, at that point we consult. This amendment is far from what the proposition aimed, and I think it would have been better to debate, and I hope we can debate and reject the proposition in its own right and revisit the topic of property transactions and our public registry outside of what feels like, as I say, a slightly shoehorned in attempt to make a passable proposition.
Thank you very much. Deputy Constable St Mary.
Thank you, sir. And I had not anticipated the contribution from Deputy Curtis, which I agree does put a different perspective on matters. Deputy Andrews' proposition focuses on the main point, or the main conclusion which came out of the review panel to which he referred and which I then chaired, which is that, as he says, parties to a transaction can pull out of an agreed verbal agreement up to the day of the court process, and that gives scope for gazundering, gazumping, depending on the state of the market at the time. It is that uncertainty which I think Deputy Andrews is seeking to knock on the head, as it were. The amendment put forward by, reminding myself of the Council of Ministers, does widen the scope, and indeed the conclusion of the previous review panel back in 2018 was that these certain aspects should be looked into. I accept that there is a case for reviewing the conveyancing system in whatever form it might take, but that alone will not address the basic problem which Deputy Andrews seeks to cure, which is the lack of certainty up to the moment of the court hearing. And earning, as I did, a major part of my living back in England before I came to Jersey in conveyancing transactions, perhaps it could be permitted to briefly review what the system is there, which is very simply that on a transaction being agreed, the solicitors acting for the two parties are put in touch with each other. Those for the seller issue a draft contract along with the copies of the relevant title deeds or reference to the land registry. Swiftly there follows a response from the solicitor acting for the purchaser with inquiries for contract, and they will then make their local searches. And the situation will be reached where the only thing they're waiting for is the mortgage offer and a satisfactory survey. And up to that point, they're primed to go. And when those come in, a phone call will take place between the two parties. They agree. A contract will be released along with a cheque for a deposit, which will be forfeited if the seller refuses to, if the buyer refuses to go ahead. And the norm, certainly back in my day, as it were, was 4 weeks. That might be shortened now. And that, I think, is the key to the problem. Transposing that procedure to Jersey, it is not that different as at the moment. The title is looked at, the property inspected, etc. And again, the purchaser is likely to be waiting for his mortgage offer or a survey before he proceeds. And the point put forward by the advocates sort of resisting any change was that when they reach that stage that the mortgage offer has come in, the satisfactory survey, they are good to go. And to delay further means that the purchaser is not able to get his house as quickly as he wanted. The seller can't get his hands on his money as quickly as he wanted. So that is the defence of the present system. But until that is cured, until there is a step taken whereby I know one deputy suggested that even a 2-week gap between a binding contract and court would be enough, I think, to remove that leverage that a purchaser or seller has. And it is to remember that a pre-sale agreement process exists now. I bought my own house with such procedure. It suited myself, it suited the vendor, and again, once the contract was signed, I could go about my business quite happily in the knowledge that the vendor would not back out because he would pay liquidated damages about 10%, as I recall, if he did. And that, I think, is a situation which Deputy Andrews is trying to arrive at. So, putting that to one side, we now have a situation with the amendment which may well seek to arrive at the same point, but it is going to be a long time, and the research I did at the time leads me to suggest that, or leads me to suppose that there will be resistance to a change in the system, or not resistance. It will require resources, and therefore I do not think that the amendment as such addresses the main problem, which is that certainty is what is required, and I think just one technical point, possibly I think the exemption in both Deputy Andrews' proposition and that from the Council Ministers is that the exemption where a mortgage falls through lack of satisfactory survey. If that exemption continues, that I think does not help in the sense that that removes the degree of certainty. If there was to be a pre-contract subject to satisfactory mortgage, where does that leave the vendor? If someone comes along and is able to offer a higher price and he's got no mortgage requirement, why shouldn't the vendor be availing himself of that better opportunity? So I think that particular exemption needs to be looked at as to whether it actually hinders the main object. And having talked myself through it, I'm not quite sure where that leaves me. So I'd originally thought that if the amendment had been accepted by Deputy Andrews, as indeed it was, then yes, we were getting some way, and the two would march concurrently, i.e. the review of the present system. Could it be improved? Which does actually look at other things like availability of surveyors, who does the survey, where are banking decisions carried out. There are all sorts of complexities which contribute to the delay. But we are back to the basic point that purchasers and vendors would like certainty before they go to court on the day. And the fear, as Deputy Justice point out, that if we accept the amendment for the Council of Ministers, that really puts that day some way away, because it'll take some considerable time to conduct the review which the Council of Ministers are proposing. So I say so, I'm in two minds now as to whether to support the amendment with a view to going back to Deputy Andrews' proposition, and perhaps he'd like to comment on that in his own comments on the amendment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Conor Tom. Deputy Reniff.
Yes, there seems to me to be a big hole in this debate. Deputy Andrews, in his speech, outlined the problem that we're addressing, and indeed eloquently so, and the Minister also addressed the problem, and we have lots of fine words about the problem. We all know it exists, and we all would like to do something about it. But Deputy Andrews did not address in his speech what he was actually proposing as the remedy, and in all of this proposition, the question is, what is the proposition and the amendment? The question is, what is actually being proposed that will make a difference? And similarly, the Housing Minister had dealt in his speech with some generalities. What I didn't hear was why he felt it necessary to propose this amendment, because there was something wrong with the proposition. Presumably there is something wrong with the proposition, that it requires a fairly substantial rewrite. Again, he has said positive things about the intent behind the proposition, but he hasn't set out clearly why he disagrees with the original proposition and what improvements he is bringing to the table. And in fact, I was a bit amused listening to the Housing Minister's speech, because I still have ringing in my ears his comments this morning, when he repeated quite often how he was a man of action, and he didn't want to waste time with process. He wanted to concentrate on actions that he could actually undertake at the time, immediately. So I formed an impression of a minister determined to rip his jacket off, roll his sleeves up, and make change happen. But then I look at this amendment, and if I do look at this amendment, I see that instead of the words that all residential property transactions should include a legally binding pre-sale agreement, we substitute to undertake a consultation on the effectiveness of the residential property transaction process and consider whether residential property should include a pre-sale agreement. Later on in the same clause, we substitute the word must with should before the word, then we substitute the word exclude in place of which may. We substitute which may in place of exclude. We substitute the word may instead of must. We substitute the word consider rather than establish. In other words, throughout this entire amendment, we are diluting any form of action. It is all conditional. It is all stuff that might happen instead of stuff that will happen, which does seem to run counter to the impression the Minister was giving this morning. And I think it perhaps suggests that, in fact, the purpose of this amendment, and I hope the Minister can provide comfort that this is not the case, but what we're looking at really here is a talking shop amendment that will sit on a shelf. It certainly has that risk, I would say, because it is worded in such a way that almost nothing is mandated to happen, and the timetable that is put in place is so long that it can safely be ignored for a considerable period of time. So we find ourselves in that slightly odd position that we sometimes find ourselves, I notice, now I've been here for 3 years, where we have a vote on something which is inoffensive, in that there's nothing much that you could seriously object to, I think, in looking at all this stuff, but also doesn't achieve much. And we face this problem quite often. Is it better to sort of encourage propositions? And Deputy Andrews' proposition, to be fair, did at least do that. It did at least. He may not have mentioned it in his speech, but in the proposition itself, there are things which are definite actions. But we have an amendment that simply punts it away to somewhere where it will be out of sight for a considerable period of time, potentially. It could get acted on, but the fact that the intent, through those changes in words, has clearly removed decisiveness and replaced it with caveats and qualifications and softenings, it does lend the feeling, the impression that what we're dealing with here is really a kick into a bit of the long grass. So I tend to feel that Deputy Curtis is right, really, and that we should perhaps be talking about the original proposition, which had meat in it, rather than an amendment which reduces it to something that has very, very little meaning. But I will be happy to listen to the Minister's summing up to hear what the response to that argument is. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. And I'm grateful to follow Deputy Reneth here, because it was interesting him saying that this provides no detail, when in the previous debates he was asking for more details, when this is actually what this is seeking to provide. I want to thank Deputy Curtis, because actually him asking for this to be debated separately gave me the opportunity to actually, because I had speeches and the concepts of things prepared before, but when I realised there was an amendment that was going to be accepted, I was like, to restructure all my speech, and that was going to be quite an interesting thing to do. I had actually had a conversation with Deputy Andrews after he lodged this, because I was going to seek to bring an amendment to this myself. But actually I felt I didn't lodge that in the end, because I felt that I was going to be disingenuous to myself in how I was taking the terms of what a pre-sale agreement would mean. My original intent was to bring in the pre-sale agreement should have been signed no more than 2 weeks before the transaction would go through the Royal Court, because that's at the point when all the details are generally brought together, when you've had your survey done, the titles have been checked, and all the work that the conveyancing teams do. But that's where that point of negotiation really starts to happen. As somebody who has recently been both the buyer and seller in a property transaction, that final week when the conveyancing teams have all the information, they do all the work, that is when some conveyancers will start the negotiation process. This is where they have established whether the I'm trying to remember whether the property fees, the monthly service charges, that's what the service charges are, outstanding works that have to be carried out on properties, whether there's outstanding planning permissions that have to be granted. These things which then mean that your offer might change, that people have the right. I mean, British people don't negotiate on many products. We negotiate on our cars and our homes, that is it. I've bought a car for the same price I've paid for a sofa, but I negotiated for the person I bought the car from, but not from who I bought the sofa from. We're a strange collection sometimes. So when Deputy Andrews lodged the initial proposition, I thought it was right of me to reach out to a lot of conveyancing firms, because having been through the process of both buying my first home, which you, sir, sat on the bench for as I swore my oath, and then when I did my most recent transaction, it was your replacement, sir, who sat on the bench. It's quite an interesting process, but actually that was, for me, the point where you're really nervous whether or not that other person who's going to swear the oath of the transaction is actually going to attend. So reaching out to the conveyancing world, sir, I was asking for their views and their opinions on what Deputy Andrews was proposing, and quite specifically about the cost, because I was very concerned that the cost of a pre-sale agreement could add, because the Deputy mentions in his report that he's trying to make sure that people don't waste money. So you have to understand how much a pre-sale agreement might cost. And I was actually quite staggered by the range of price that a pre-sale agreement may be charged by conveyancers, with one saying that their basic price would be £300 to £400, and that was provided it was simple, clear-cut, and no complications. So one other conveyancing firm saying that they start at £1,200. When I went to meet with one firm, they requested that I came and speak to them personally, and Chatham House rules means I will not say who this firm were. They raised the question, but who's going to, which side pays for this? Is it the buyer or is it the seller? Or if you are the person like I was at my last property transaction where I was both, would I need one or two pre-sale agreements? So the deputy, when he brought his original proposition, which is well intended, and because there is risks and vulnerabilities that exist within our property market, I don't agree that the pre-sale agreement was the remedy for this, but it did strike me that this could actually add a potential cost. He talked about other jurisdictions where pre-sale agreements are used, like in Europe, but in Europe, the sellers have to get a bundle of information about the properties they are going to be selling. So actually the buyer is provided with a lot of information before they make that offer. Over here, we make an offer based on doing a quick walk around of the property that we like, that we've seen online, and then we make a negotiated price down on that. We will then get a survey in, which, depending on the price you may pay, I think my last survey was about 1% of the property value that I bought, which became quite expensive. And so I was committed to that before I got to my conveyancing fees. However, if the survey came back with lots of red flags telling me that the roof needed to be replaced and it was going to cost me about £50,000 to £100,000, but I'd signed a pre-sale agreement before that result came back, where would we stand? So, sir, my full intention today for this whole debate was to vote down Deputy Andrews' proposition, because he's right, there is something that needs to be fixed with our process, but the pre-sale agreement wasn't the thing to fix. But where I can support the amendment is actually the reasons why the Deputy Renniff was saying that we couldn't, the shoulds, the must, because there are so many different parts to this that need to be reviewed. Even the conveyancing firms themselves couldn't necessarily agree on what that fixing of the transactions need to be. So we do need to look at this in the round, and to commit to just looking at a single entity or a single part isn't going to solve the problems that we have. And so, as well, as I mentioned before, with you being on the bench when I swore my oath, that is the point that our contracts are passed when we buy property. And we can have pre-sale agreements, and if that person one of the parties involved in that pre-sale agreement chooses not to swear that oath, the sale falls anyway. And someone is still going to be out thousands of pounds. And so I can't support a system that requires people to spend more money, especially when we have people who are taking part in the assisted purchasing process, where they might be scrimping down to their last pounds and pence to actually be able to afford to go through court and to buy the property in the first place. And a failure that is not their fault, but may see them face a penalty, can then completely scupper their ability to ever own a property, sir. So what I like about the amendment is this broadening of the scope, trying to find the way to, and I believe the council ministers have brought a proposition, which means we can show the public that actually this does need to be looked at. I do agree that I think the time frame is probably a bit long, but we also need to make sure it's done properly and done thoroughly. We are going to go through a PERDA period where a lot of this work will stop, and we have to make sure that the returning assembly needs to keep an eye on this. And this is where, sir, I believe that, for me, my manifesto pledge going forward, I've already started thinking about this next thing, is about making sure that we don't drop off projects which are really important to the public. And that goes from everything from this to Fort Region to any other number of things, sir. So, sir, if this amendment isn't accepted, then I would be rejecting the full proposition, but I do urge members to accept the amendment.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
So I thought this was a rather sensible amendment because gazumping is a problem, but the solution is not straightforward. In fact, things could be ameliorated without any change in the law. When I was in practice, admittedly a good number of years ago, a preliminary agreement of sale, as we called it at that stage, was the norm. And when a client came to see an advocate, he would take instructions. If it was the seller, a preliminary agreement would be sent over in short order to the purchaser's lawyer, and one would move on from there. Both a purchaser and a seller could stipulate or require a pre-sale agreement as a condition of the agreement. The seller could say to the prospective purchaser, I want a preliminary agreement of sale, a pre-sale agreement, and if you haven't signed one within 2 weeks, then I shall be at liberty to keep the property on the market and accept another offer if it comes along. And the purchaser could say, in reverse, exactly the same thing. I want a pre-sale agreement. And the lawyers would produce them. The Law Society might be able to help in that respect and create an incentive for an agreement, a pre-sale agreement to be signed. The problem with Deputy Andrews' proposition is that it creates as many problems or issues as it solves. What should a pre-sale agreement state or include? Should there be a statutory model? If there is a statutory model, can the parties contract out of it? If not, why not? If they can contract out of it, to what extent can they make an agreement which suits them and not the state? What happens if circumstances change between the signature of a pre-sale agreement and completion? And this is not an uncommon state of affairs. Suppose both parties are ignorant of the fact that the sewage system is completely inadequate, that all the rainwater goes into the sewage system and nobody knew about it, but some assiduous lawyer discovers that that is the case before completion takes place. What happens then? The pre-sale agreement will not deal with that because nobody thought of it. So is the pre-sale agreement binding? Does the purchaser have to complete and spend £30,000 on a drainage amendment, a drainage problem which he knew nothing about? Or is the seller entitled to require that? The problems of changing circumstances will be familiar to any practicing lawyer. And therefore, if this amendment is rejected, I am afraid that I would have to vote against the principal proposition. This amendment seems to me to be a rather sensible compromise because it requires the problem to be addressed. It requires some research, as Deputy Curtis suggests is necessary to be carried out, and that seems to me to be the sensible solution.
Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. Before I rise, I wonder if I should take members' views on proposing the adjournment.
Yeah, as long as it's before the speech, sir.
Well, harsh, but...
No, to be fair, it would give the member a longer time to speak tomorrow if he wants to.
Do you propose the adjournment?
I do, sir.
Very well. The Assembly stands adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.